So, Jacob, great to have you here. Everybody, Jacob is the co-founder and CEO of Marco. Really interesting company. I'll let him tell you more about it. But he's been in the tech space for many years in sales and business development for companies like Yelp, Groupon, Taboola, and OpenWeb. With Marco, he's raised over 30 million in equity and 200 million in debt. And he holds a bachelor in music degree from University of Toronto. I'm gonna let him introduce a little bit more about himself, a little bit about Marco, and Jacob, if you can also share on a high level about your fundraising journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Katina, and hi everyone. Great for being here, and thanks to the Endeavor team for inviting me today. So yeah, just beyond the blurb to introduce myself a little bit. As you can tell, a little bit of an unorthodox background, getting into fintech and entrepreneurship in general. Studied classical music. My plan was to be a classical trumpet player, so that didn't exactly work out. But along the way, I really was able to kind of build a career that I didn't necessarily envision myself in, which was initially in sales. And really, I think a lot of learnings and effectively, as we talk about fundraising for your companies, it really is a sales role. And for many of you that are CEOs of your companies or co-founders or COOs, you are, really that chief evangelist, that chief salesperson, and really focused on motivating not just investors to be able to write you a check and to kind of join you on this journey, but also to recruit talent and to ensure that you can get the best possible people. And so a little bit about how I got to where I am now with Marco. When I moved to New York City just after graduating from University of Toronto, was to be a starving artist. Was couch surfing and doing gigs and studying with a trumpet teacher, former principal of the Metropolitan Opera. And to make a very long sob story short, my off ramp out of the starving artist lifestyle was getting a job at Yelp to be one of the early employees in their New York offers, making 33,000 a year, doing 80 to 100 cold calls. And as grueling as an experience that was, I think it was the best possible uh, opportunity for me to really cut my teeth and start building confidence and get used to rejection, because it was really a relentless, brutal job. Monthly quotas to ensure that you were going to be able to keep that job, pounding the phones in a very loud, frenetic environment with a bunch of young people just out of school. And for some reason, I took to that job and I excelled there. And then my career kind of evolved, went to Groupon soon after in a similar type of role. And then I got more into venture and growth stage backed companies in the ad tech space. So I was working at a company now public, Taboola, and then a company called GumGum, and then OpenWeb, and really had a lot of exposure to enigmatic founders when I started to work for these more late stage venture backed companies, and really kind of helped to fuel this entrepreneurial spirit that I had. And finally, in the fall of 2019, decided to leave my job at OpenWeb and join a venture accelerator. I couldn't even tell you what a VC was, how the asset class worked. I knew nothing. The irony was, working at so many venture-backed companies, I never interacted with an investor, didn't understand how they underwrote an investment, didn't understand kind of the ideation process, what type of structure that VCs look for, how they think about, that internal rate of return, how they think about fund size, success, let alone how to find them or reach them. So I really started from a very, very cold start scenario as far as looking to build a venture-backed company. But what I learned about myself at that period of time, now about 6 years ago, was it really kind of lit a fire under me that I didn't necessarily know I had. I was just really, really curious. I love learning. I was just like a sponge. And so this accelerator program was great, in order for me to kind of really get a lot of the base case knowledge. And then it was both obviously the balance of being a founder. You obviously have to build a business and you have to have vision and you have to do all the things that in the beginning are annoying, from payroll and doing your incorporation and finding a law firm and all those things. But obviously then also, creating a business and finding your initial clients and hiring your initial employees, all while you're trying to hire and raise funds, for your company. So a little bit what we'll talk about today, and I'm excited to dive in with Katina, is just some kind of more context around what VCs are, how they think, how they look to underwrite investments, some best practices as far as running a process to create the FOMO, which is that fear of missing out, which is unfortunately really what drives urgency and the ability for them to make decisions. And really what I hope is going to be the main takeaway for all of you is that if somebody like me with a music degree that just worked at sales at not particularly attractive companies is able to raise 30 million in excess of venture capital for a fintech company based in Latam as a Canadian, you guys are all going to be just fine. So if somebody like me can do it, you guys are going to be off to the races. So yeah, with that, Katina, I'm happy to maybe kick off with questions or
Yeah,
take.
let's do that. And thank you for that inspirational thing at the end. I think it's true. You have a super interesting story what you built with Marco is very interesting, and your experience with fundraising because of both the equity side and the debt side is going to be very valuable to this conversation. So thanks for being open with us and sharing the truths with the group here. Let's start from the beginning. What's one thing you wish you knew before your first raise?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say even in the very beginning when I was reaching out to pre-seed investors, I still probably didn't exactly understand well enough how, like, what makes an investor the right fit? Like, how do I go about finding the right type of investor? And based on that fund, how do I know if what I'm raising for at that amount, that value really makes sense? And a big part of that was really understanding, I was focused more on the brand of the fund. Like, is it a fund that we've all heard of? Is it an Andreessen? Is it a Sequoia? What have you? There's a lot of famous seed funds out there. Or is it somebody that, fund I don't know? The reality is the fund is really secondary to the partner. And that is a really, really important component. You need to be really mindful and do kind of research and homework through LinkedIn, networking to really try to find a partner at a fund that is relevant to what you're building. That's invested maybe in similar companies, something that you like and respect with them. And, as the cliche goes, really bringing on investors is like a marriage. You're going to be with these people for a long time. I've been now with some of my investors, over 5 years. And so you really want to try to find, founder references and find the ability to ensure that this is somebody that you want on board. Once you're able to kind of really focus on the partner, less so than the fund. Fund can be important, but you want to really try to find, if it's a good fund, they're going to have a good reputation. And if it's a good partner at that fund, they're going to kind of lead with that confidence. But also understanding that fund size and what's their definition of success. And I think this is kind of an important note. Often we hear this concept of fund returners. So what that usually means, and it's a little bit more skewed when you get to pre-seed, I would say, but seed, it usually is where the kind of math starts to make more sense. So if you're talking to a small $100 million seed fund, and let's say they write $10 million investments a year, that would be huge for seed just for round number sake. They're really looking for 1 to 2 of those investments to be fund returners, where that $10 million check is going to be at least a 10x to return the whole fund. And so why that is kind of important is the fund returning mentality in venture is really the easiest way to say you ask them what their fund size is, you think about their average ticket, and then when you're building out your model, when you're actually showing them your financials and that trajectory, you want to make sure that based on comps, public market comps, multiples that could make sense at that potential exit, you could return their fund. And if you don't have that trajectory, right, if you're not ambitious enough, or if you don't have the use of proceeds, or all these things that we can talk a little bit more about today in more detail, it's not going to make sense for that investor. And I think one of the other big things that I've noticed for a lot of founders is, which makes sense from a rational perspective, but if you're a founder building a venture-backed company, you should not be that rational. You should be able to strike a balance, or at least if you are very rational, you can temper that down and be more ambitious, have more vision, shoot for the moon, the brass ring, to build the empire, whatever you want, to kind of, create that imagery. Because if you're too conservative, if you are not as focused on growth, if you're not focused on building a category defining company, it's just not a fit for venture. Doesn't mean it can't be a great business, but if you're trying to raise too small, especially in an environment where the barrier to entry has never been lower to build technology companies, that is just the reality with AI. So what can happen is you can be the best possible founder, the smartest person. Um, you can even be talented commercially. But if there's somebody out there that has a similar idea and they're a better fundraiser and they raise more capital, they potentially could outgun you. And, I'm sure most of you read Zero to One, maybe the most famous startup book. And it's obviously not a hard and fast rule trying to build and develop these businesses with monopolistic characteristics, as Peter Thiel says. But at the end of the day, it is going to be competitive. Very rarely will you be the only person, in this ecosystem. And so, despite the fact that you might want to be more conservative, raise less money, show profitability in the near term, that's not really what VCs are looking for, especially at the early stage. They want to see ambition. 80+% of their investment, if not 90%, is underwritten on you, the founder. The product, the business, doesn't matter really at all. Especially if you're early stage, they know things are going to change, you're going to pivot. You have, less data. They really want to buy you. At the end of the day, VCs are looking to get rich and make money. That's what they're doing. There is no other motive for them, whether they tell you that or not. So try to get that out of your head. They want to look at somebody and say, this person is an outlier. I'm betting on this person. They're going to return my fund. And it's really, really important to take those steps in the mirror every day, whether it's imposter syndrome, whether it's confidence, to continue to build that aspect of your persona. I promise you, the hardest thing that I've had to break through with founders, I've had employees that have left to start companies that I do coaching sessions with. The hardest thing for people to really embrace is the fact that when you are early as a company, when revenue is small and incremental, when the product is a work in progress, when you're still validating, like they try to lean more. They show the decks, they show the wireframes, or they show like the progress or all these different things. They don't care about that, especially if they are not believing and buying you. So, I know there was a lot of kind of context, in there, but at the end of the day, I think really understanding that partner, understanding that fund return kind of calculus and making sure that you have the model and the numbers that can really back in and make sense for that investor to cut a check.
Everything was so good. Like all the great stuff. You even hit on a couple of points. But let's dive deeper into one of the points that we wanted to talk about, which is like, what do you think is something that early stage founders get consistently wrong about how VCs work internally? You talked a little bit about the fact that like, right, they want that one, two, three company 10x return. You gotta put that persona out there and that sort of strategy out there. But might be some other more granular things that maybe you went through or you've heard other founders go through?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I think there's this and this mysticism surrounding VCs, that these are the smartest. This is one of the sexiest jobs you can have in the broader asset management, finance, whatever you want to call it, the broader capital ecosystem. And these are the smartest people that if you get the right partner, the right investor that's minted unicorns, they are going to mint you into a unicorn. Couldn't be further than from the truth. You will be lucky if you have good, trustworthy, value-add investors that have high integrity. But the reality is we're not going to build your business. And 9 times out of 10, they're going to get in your way more than they are going to help facilitate you. And the diligence and the vetting process of investors is really important. If you haven't talked to multiple founder references or you don't ask for those references, it's a very normal thing to do. You shouldn't be shy about doing that. I promise you, if you get it wrong, I've heard horror stories of talking to founders that did not do enough diligence and understanding about a lot of terms that VCs will use to try to negotiate better deals. And we can talk about those things if it's relevant later. You should hopefully all have a law firm, a reputable law firm that's representing you, so that, if you don't have to be an expert, but you really can't do a deal, obviously, without a lawyer, so that you can understand liquidation preferences, understand that cap stack, what it would take for you to make money after accumulating all of that pref. You have to really understand participating preferred in some of these, really unfriendly characteristics that can give, much enhanced economics for investors and de-risk them. So there's a lot of those things, like just because they want to invest in your company, they will eventually be on your side of the table, but the reality is in the very beginning stages, you know, it's a negotiation, and you need to be prepared to negotiate and represent your best interests, and not feel like you're going to potentially alienate or lose that interest from that investor. Uh, and they just are not know-it-alls. As I said earlier, they're, often, sometimes if you get lucky, they'll have an operator background. Those people are the most valuable usually if they come from a background that is more of a banking, consulting, generalist background. Usually they're not going to a lot of value. They're not going to have a ton of empathy. They're looking at you as numbers on a sheet when you're reporting your numbers. They don't care about what you're doing in the trenches every day with your team, the hiring, firing. And you should not let that get to you or frustrate you. You should look at investors as tools, but by no means are they should influence whether you're successful or not. They can only really hurt you. The really, really good ones, yes, they can help you. They can try to double down. They can catalyze rounds. That's very, very rare, though, especially in the very, very early stages. And I would say that the second piece, again, I mentioned it earlier, maybe most importantly, me and my co-founder, I just want to paint you this absurdity. So me and my co-founder didn't go to particularly great schools, work at particularly great places. There's literally a Harvard Business School case study on Antler that features us as a company, and they compared us with like two graduate Ivy League founders, who unfortunately their company is no longer up and running, and they're basically showing how the Antler process works, how like they pick these two scrappy guys that have a lot of grit but don't have like the brands and the resumes, and then you also have this other team that has the Ivy League graduate degrees, and they're an interesting team, and basically said on paper these guys were not really that compelling to look at, but they had, sales skills, good grit, XYZ. And I think my biggest piece was the fact that neither of us were technical founders, that we didn't build any tech, for probably about a year. And we were transparent and candid about that. The fact that we're building a company for Latam and I'm Canadian, I don't even speak Spanish. All these things, again, trying to paint the absurdity for you. Like, despite that, I was able to really craft a narrative and represent, myself and my co-founder as people that were going to take this company, to the moon, which is what you're trying to really do. And that's why that kind of the skills, the tactics, the strategy to do that can make all the difference in the world. And everybody is coachable. You don't have to be a natural salesperson. You don't have to be, born to do this. You can learn. There is things that you can, work on to improve. And I'm doing it every day. I'm a fraction of, some of these really, really incredible outlier founders. Obviously, they've raised, billions of dollars, but I'm working and I'm growing and I'm invested in that development. I don't know, Kati, do we have a question? Did you want me to jump on, or?
We can
I
jump
have a
on it
question.
now or in our Q&A, however you prefer.
I would love to ask a question here.
Oh,
Go.
yeah, go for it.
So obviously you painted a pretty grim picture of the VC land, and actually it's worse than what you painted it usually. I've done through a couple of VC rounds myself, and I'm now on the tokenization round. And I'm wondering if it's even worth wasting time on VCs, and why not go straight to a tokenization where you're dealing directly with retail investors and you don't have to get shafted by the VC deal.
Yeah, that's a question. I think at the end of the day, I think one of the hardest things for founders to do is, especially if you're a first-time founder like myself, to look in the mirror and say, like, this is what I'm going to build, and I'm going to build it come hell or high water or failure. Like, are you building the $1 billion, X? Are you building whatever it is that your objective is? A lot of people don't know, and VCs are going to ask you, what's your exit strategy? What's your outcome? Like, and which can seem absurd when you're a brand new company raising a pre-seed round or what have you. But you need to kind of do that soul searching and figure it out and understand that, because it very well could be that you do a tokenization, a crowdfunding, whatever, and that might give you the capital to go out there and execute. And at the end of the day, your focus should be having the capacity to build and execute on that plan, on that vision, versus being able to kind of, signal prestige with, being a venture-backed business or having, high quality VCs. It is really tricky. I think the reality is when you're dealing with retail investors, it can and it will come with more headaches, especially if they're able to reach you. There is more regulatory scrutiny, even if they're doing a tokenization or something. You need to understand where that money's come from. you know, or you should. You might not. So there's you know pros and cons to either of them. But you know, I would really say simply, depending on like what if you believe you can achieve your goals, you know, with that strategy, I don't necessarily see a downside. I'm not putting you know, kind of, you know, VC on a pedestal. Um, so and yeah, I see a question here from Salvador on, you know, pre-seed, pre-MVP stage, like angels. Um, so I mean, I wouldn't say Salvador again, like I wouldn't say that no VC will ever look at you. I mean, we had nothing at all but a deck when we raised our pre-seed of like $950,000 from a pre-seed fund. Um, so, you know, I'd say going to angels, you know, can be a strategy, especially if they do that in that friends, family, fools type round dynamic. That's not necessarily easier than going to an institutional VC. And again, you need they're still betting on you, whether it's friends and family that are taking a bet on you, and you need a few $100,000 to create your MVP to get something up and running, you know, or if you're talking to a pre-seed fund that really focuses, at the end of the day, they're betting on you exclusively. Your idea, your MVP doesn't matter. So the point is, can be an interesting exercise if you're at that stage, and you know, it's like it's really hard to internalize this. The idea doesn't matter. If you take away one thing from this, your idea doesn't matter. It doesn't. Your product doesn't matter. It doesn't. It really doesn't. If you're so focused on that, the product, I'm saying early stage. At where we are now, we're raising a Series B. Yes, revenue, you know, and they care less about the product than they care about trailing 12 months revenue, profit margins, growth, et cetera. I'm talking about for those of you that are basically starting from square one. Nothing matters but you. The focus and attention should be almost equal weighted for you continuing to try to validate and understand within developing yourself and your persona and your ability to be somebody that, like I had one of my investors tell me from Village Global, which is a really, really solid seed fund in Silicon Valley. They have great LPs like Mark Zuckerberg and Satya Nadella and Bezos, all these luminaries. And he told me the first thing he thinks about when he gets on a call with a founder is, can he imagine that person ringing the bell at the stock exchange? Like, can he imagine that person getting up there and embodying that moment? And for him, usually it's a binary thing. And he almost knows within the first 10, 20 minutes of meeting somebody whether he thinks that, and that determines his investment, because it's all centered on the person. And that's really the big challenge, is because even if you have the most incredible resume, the incredible degree, the credible background, those things are all a big piece of it. But if you're not able to create a narrative and a story, and we can talk about a little bit later, I got some great pitching advice. We want to talk about pitching from an investor at Benchmark. Benchmark's one of the preeminent VC funds invested in Uber and other top tech companies. Anyhow, it really is. The biggest takeaway for all of you should be like, yes, you know, you need to turn this product, this idea into a business. But if you don't focus on yourself, getting able to pitch, building that confidence, you know, and instilling that in your audience, the battle is that much harder. The numbers need to be that much better. The traction needs to be that much better. Yeah, but ultimately, Salvador, finding angels is the same way, and approach is the same way as finding VCs. You need warm intros. If you're reaching out cold, it's a fool's errand. I don't recommend anybody to do any cold emails, any cold outreach. That was another mistake that I made. You should be going on LinkedIn. You see people that are connected with people that you want to target. And really the pitch to that angel or that person should be, I really love what you did with your career in XY field. I'd love to, you know, have an opportunity to pick your brain and discuss, you know, a problem that I'm working to solve. And don't make it about asking, raising money. Don't say the raise. Just try to build that relationship. You know, try to get that opportunity to discuss, you know, get to know them. As one of my investors says, open them up like a flower. It really is a two-way street. You don't want to just get on a call, start pitching, asking for money. They'll slam the door in your face.
Right. Got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
A great question. And I'm happy to share some resources after with like angel groups close by. By close by, I mean in Florida, some other resources that were very valuable at that stage. But thank you for the questions, and Jacob for answering them. Talking a little bit about like investors, how did you build your investor target list, and what was like your approach prioritizing who to talk first? I know you said warm intros, but does that go with a certain level of strategy? How did you go about that targeting?
Yeah, that's a great idea. Great question, rather. Yeah, I would say, I mean, literally, I had the coldest of cold starts, but was lucky that I came out of an accelerator. So that accelerator invested $100,000. That basically enabled them to kind of at least create a handful of intros. It was a brand new accelerator, didn't have any brand or reputation. It's called Antler, but this was the first cohort in the US. It's been around for a few years now in the US. So things have improved a little bit, but in essence, really it was through them that I started to be able to build that initial network. But really a lot of the research that I did was looking on Crunchbase, looking on TechCrunch, all these basically publications, and doing research on companies that I thought were in my peer group. So, I think one of the best ways to start is to use some of these materials to look at people that are building in your space or adjacent to your space and try to really map those investors. Now, the tricky part with that is if it's really, really competitive with what another company they've invested in, that could be really tricky. But then what you can do, especially now with ChatGPT, is you can look for kind of analogs. You can really just run your whole process through this and say, what's the partner that led the deal of this company? I mean, it's a lot easier than when I had to do it back in 2019. But the point is, you really want to try to, find that relevant partner that at the fund that invested in an industry that's relevant to you. And then you should be exclusively looking on LinkedIn to who you're connected with, to resources like Endeavor, other founders that and find people that can give you a warm intro to that person. At the very, very last resort, if you believe somebody is the absolute, key person that you need to have and you have no way of contacting them outside of a cold email or a cold LinkedIn, sure, by all means try, but the success rate is really, really low. And especially now with AI, because people are just blasting the shit out of VCs. And I even got an email from one of my investors from Village Global basically saying how like VCs have just like completely like not responding to anything now because it's gotten absurd with AI. You need to build your network. If you don't have the network, you need to go out and build it. You need to go to networking things. You need to connect with people that you see on the screen here. You need to be proactive, and you need to build those relationships. Even if there isn't a relationship there, it's really difficult to get somebody to make that intro. Why would somebody vouch for you if they don't know who you are? Why would they want to potentially, create a headache for one of those investors? So don't just, depend on the kindness of strangers. And don't depend on people, necessarily wanting you to win and succeed. The hard truth is you need to go out there and build a relationship and have somebody really love what you're doing and believe in you in order to want to be able to kind of, help and provide that assistance. And that takes a lot of work. This is a full-time 24/7 initiative. If you really want to take your company and build that, unicorn business that, all of us have our sights set on.
I'm glad you touched upon like how do you build your network. I think a lot of founders, especially when they're starting out, at whatever age it may be, like it's a little bit hard to go and like start building a network. And so yeah, I encourage you all to like go out there to the right events and slowly you'll start like getting invited to the more private conversations or like start understanding which are the events that like are gravitating more of the people that you're looking for to connect with. One asked an interesting question in the chat that it was about like if you see an impact on age with fundraising from VC. I'm happy to add to that after, but wanted to get your thoughts there.
Yeah, it's a really great point. I think there's absolutely no, age, limitation. What I will say, and this is the challenge, this is where you do get the biases from VCs. And this is just the data, right? The challenge that a lot of VCs have is their whole job, just to preface, I'm sure most of you guys already understand and internalize this, the VC model, but basically if you take, they're playing roulette is what they're doing. Out of 10 bets, they know that, 5, 6 of them are going to completely lose their money. Maybe 1 or 2 of them will make their money back. And if they're lucky, 1, maybe 2 are going to, return the fund. And you can extrapolate that on percentages. It's really, they're trying to find the one. They're trying to find the needle in the haystack. That's the model. They know they're going to lose money on most of their investments. So the problem is, if you look at a reference points and you look at data about, the profiles of people that have built category defining unicorns over the past, 2-3 decades, yeah, unfortunately, the statistics skew, younger men, at least when they're starting out these companies. And that's obviously provided, uphill battles for, people that don't fit into those demographics. Because really VCs are looking at these things and they're saying, okay, I want to find the next, Zuckerberg or the next, Sam Altman or whatever. And so that's a reality. It doesn't come from any bias other than that people are trying to find the other people when they think of these founders. So it shouldn't hold back, age. Again, if anything, that experience, needs to be kind of, front and center as far as, why at this point in your life and your career do you want to do this? I think the other challenge that sometimes VCs have is they like to try to work with people before real life gets in the way, that are willing to sleep in the office and eat ramen and all this shit, right? That you hear these stories about. And that can be tricky sometimes if people have families and real lives and commitments. But the biggest takeaway that there should be, and yeah, there you go. And continue, you can touch about this and make sense. Hopefully, I'm just turned 35, so hopefully that's a good signal for me. But point being is that at the end of the day, VCs just want to make money off you. They're looking to bet on a horse. If you're that horse, whether you're 18 or 68, it really shouldn't matter. But a part of that is like they need to walk away from a conversation. We've all experienced it. When you meet somebody that's really enigmatic, charismatic, they just kind of bring you in. You're just like hanging on every word that they say, right? You've seen it when you see certain CEOs or founders that you meet speak, right? That it's not just a data-driven decision when VCs invest. It's emotional. It's especially emotional because they're really looking to put those chips like on you. It really is an emotional, and that's why the fear of missing out, like creating that tension where it's like they're worried they're going to lose the deal, that you're going to be the one that got away. It's more similar to dating than anything in business, is the irony. It really is the most similar thing to dating than to business. But it has all of those, it just has, the data room things in there. But really it's like, it is what that kind of dynamic. So, but go ahead, Katina, to chime in there it was a good question, Juan.
Yeah, I think it's really, really good. And I echo what Jacob said. We see a lot of later stage founders in the sense of like also they've had experience with either many companies or experience have built out a career in a particular industry or field, and those are the founders that tend to scale. More likely you'll find more successful older founders than younger founders. I think this myth of like the young founder out of college is very like a diamond in the dozen kind of situation. But at the end it's true. It's like if you're building a good business, you're scaling a good company, doesn't really matter what age you are. Like we have founders that they started being entrepreneurs at the age of 45 when they retired from a big corporate career, and like they're being entrepreneurs now, and vice versa. Like stories like Jacob, that like very young they started and they successfully created a company. So yeah, it depends on what who you are as a founder, what you want to create. I think we have a question here about like events and like prioritizing them. Do you want to tackle that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The biggest thing I would say is it's a very fair point. It can be exhausting. I would really try to, if possible, understand the attendees at the event. So if you can get an attendee list, the content of the event doesn't matter at all. It's the people, it's the networking, right? So how do you understand who's going to this event? Can you ask the organizer, for an attendee list? If you can't, can you ping people and understand that's going? The only focus should be who's there. If the people are there, both founders or there's commercial opportunities or there's investors, you should go. If you think it's a high risk and you're exhausted and you can't validate that this is going to be worth your time based on the quality of people, don't go. Should be as simple as that. The content doesn't matter.
100%. That takes me to another conversation of like, what was your mindset going into investor conversations? Like, I know you talked about a little bit of the imposter syndrome and doing some exercises there. Did you do anything to help with that before you went into an actual conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the irony is I really looked at, and I never thought or knew I would be good at sales or getting sales again. I was a trumpet player, so I spent most of my time in college 5, 6 hours a day with an instrument here where I couldn't even speak if I wanted to. So that was really the irony. I was practicing most of the time. And what was interesting though is you're doing all this practice, 5, 6 hours a day of practice for like few performances a year for a recital, a concert, what have you. So I was able to build in this mindset preparation and understanding the difference between practicing, between like working on skills, improving, and then performing. And that translated really well when I started my career in sales because I would go home and I'd record my pitch. I'd pitch in the mirror. I would do all of these things before then I'm doing it live with a client, trying to close a deal and keep my job. And again, what really motivated me, I was stone broke. I couldn't afford an apartment. I was selling cigars, retail minimum wage. I never had an internship or anything. I didn't even know what an internship was, how you got one. Like I was starting from scratch. So my motivation was that survival instinct in the beginning. And I took a lot of those kind of learnings from music to be able to kind of apply into sales. And I did the exact same thing, even to a more intense degree in pitching. And there's some tactics that I can kind of share with this. So everybody should figure out their individual routine and what works for them. Kind of funny inside joke at the company is when I was doing my first pitch to get invested by Antler and their committee, where I had quit my job, I was burning money. I had spent 6 months of my time on doing this. And now I have one chance to try to get an investment. I just turned 30 years old and I either have 100,000 and I can try to start this company, or I got nothing and I back to square one. And I literally was like, before I went in, I was doing push-ups. I was listening to Metallica, Enter Sandman. And like, I was just trying to get pumped up. I was just trying to hype myself up. I wanted to run through a wall. That worked for me. For some of you, it might need to be more zen. You might want to find that quiet, that peaceful point. It's very individualized. I knew I needed to get some of that nervous energy out of my system. And I'd practiced that pitch a million times. I'd memorized it. I knew the deck backwards and forwards. I think there isn't a lot of replacements for that kind of preparation. But you need to find out that individual. Like you should know when your heart rate, do you get nervous? Do you not? How do you, want to kind of, think of that mentality? And, when it comes to kind of the tactical pieces of it, you really do want to kind of, build up. It needs to be a story. Your entire pitch should feel like a story. How you started in your beginnings, whatever it was, how you became enraptured with this problem statement, how you had sleepless nights, just can't stop but wanting to work and motivate on this, and building up into this big Everest. How you're going to build this incredible category defining company that's going to change lives, both of your investors, yourself, your team, and everything. And it really is like it's a cadence. It's just like, and when you get into that flow state, you can feel it and you start to believe it yourself, right? Maybe in the beginning you don't, but working on that, practicing it, people you trust, pitching with them, understanding if it resonates with them, what's important, what isn't important. I really encourage you, especially if you guys don't have more commercial backgrounds in sales, if you haven't read sales books or sales strategy, or if you haven't done any kind of these, sales psychology, philosophy books, there's a million out there. I mean, there isn't any one that I'd recommend, over the other, but preparation is really important. And just a last piece on this, don't go out for your first pitches with the tier ones. Please don't. Like, have your list of investors and partners, right, at the partner level, a high quality blue.
I think you lost the internet, no?
Yes, I thought it was me. Hi, Jacob. We lost you for
Sorry.
a sec there. Sorry about that.
The WeWork Wi-Fi here, not great.
No, it happens to me. I thought it was mine. You were just saying that please don't have the first funds be your tier ones, not the
Yes.
partners. And I think you were gonna say the associates, maybe start with them with other funds.
You can. I don't think there's a huge issue with the problem with the associate pitching is it's inevitable. We all get sucked into that. You really want to try to avoid pitching associates, especially if you do have some power and control. if you find a really good associate that's really a champion, can be okay. But somebody that's pitched over 1,000 times past 5 years at least, I mean, 9 times out of 10, if you don't have the partner taking the time of day on that call, it can be difficult to get a champion out of associate, but not always. And again, if you're hard up for pitches and meetings, take everyone you got. But the point is just start and hone your pitch on the lower tier funds so that hopefully you can get some of that live practice in and you're really getting geared up to go on the tier ones.
Yeah, I agree with that. And two people asked a little bit about like pitching a company that is not sort of tech driven or product driven. And maybe if there's like a switch in the way then you approach that conversation. If you have any thoughts there.
Yeah, I think the kind of harsh reality is, yeah, I mean, service companies, software factories are just not really venture investable. I wouldn't be looking to raise venture capital for those businesses. The challenge is, venture is looking for defined moats and scalability based on technology. So if your service-oriented business needs more and more people to provide a service or a product, and it's not really based on a core product or value proposition that you're able to scale, it's just not something they're going to be interested in investing. Doesn't mean it can't be a great business. It's not better than a lot of venture-backed businesses that are prone to fail. But yeah, nonprofit, service-oriented business, not a fit for VC. I wouldn't really spend too much time there. It's a great business that you can get, again, investment from, again, private equity loves car washes and anything, right? Like, doesn't mean it's a bad business. It can be a great business. It's just not a venture investable business. And that's why really understanding the asset class and you just doing some research and understanding, again, what makes a venture investable business, right? That scalability, that geometric growth, why you need to take on so much money in order to build that defensibility, the tech, create the moat, have those defensibility dynamics, versus, what private equity looks for, which is more of an exercise of financial engineering, applying leverage to a business, kind of restructuring, making it run more efficiently, and being able to hopefully exit that business, within a, 3 to 5 year time horizon. And there's investors that are looking for good businesses and business owners across the board. And again, plenty of good non-venture investable businesses out there, that's for sure.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because I think sometimes with a topic of having VC be a mystic entity, a lot of founders think that in order to be successful, they gotta raise VC, whatever the model of the business might be. And you said at the beginning, like, it is very much a marriage whenever you bring in an investor, whatever type of investor, a debt, a private equity, angel, a grant, whatever it may be, it's gonna be a marriage. So you gotta wanna pair up your asset class and the type of investor with the type of venture that you're building. For a nonprofit, it can be a lot of grants or donations and stuff like that. That comes with its fair share of reporting and stuff like that. With service businesses, we have in the Endeavor portfolio a lot of more service-based businesses with a technological components to scale. And I think they have a different fundraising approach than like your typical tech. So I think that's a really good point that you brought up there in that marriage.
Yeah, and I would say too that still, whether you're fundraising from VCs or other investors, it's not that dissimilar. The one thing I would say is if it's clear in your business, the outcome is not like you're not painting that public unicorn picture, then all the more reason to have buttoned up financials, really, really lucid, projections, cash flow positivity. It's a different exercise because, those other asset classes can't sustain, like private equity is not looking to lose on any one deal. Every deal that they're looking to do needs to try to, achieve their kind of, IRR mandate for that, vintage that they're investing out of. So it's a different context, but still all the skill set, the salesmanship, the way that you present yourself, your confidence, all are really, really imperative, regardless of the profile of investor you're pitching.
1,000%. And Jacob here has one of the best pitches I've ever heard. And I think it has a lot to do, probably not with the push-ups, from what I learned before. No, but he's very prepared with the questions. Every time he talked about Marco Financial, tailored a little bit at least the ways that I've heard to whoever he was speaking to. So you guys got the right person to talk about this. What's your view on timing a raise, and how do you balance being prepared with not rushing into it?
Really, really, really tricky question. So much goes into this because uh, there's so much out of all of our control, unfortunately. You know, I just had lunch with one of my investors in Santiago, Chile, just a few weeks ago, and he was teasing me because you know, he invested and we're doing fine, but he's like, if you guys started 1 year earlier and you were able to hit your your raise timing in 2021 when everything was inflated in boom times, he's like, man, would you guys be even having more of a war chest to run and gun with? So point being is timing is tricky. Started the company, COVID hit, you know what I mean? Like, then COVID was good for our business. And then, we start raising in 2022, market crash. We have to do an insider round. Like a lot of stuff can be outside your control, and you need to be able to scramble and have resilience. Every plan that I had ultimately got ripped up based on market dynamics. Right now, even with the tariffs, we've had one of our best starts to the year ever. But we finance Latam exports into the US. We have one client that's been affected by the tariffs that sells to General Motors. They happen to be our biggest client. They're about close to 4 million in revenue a year, this one client alone. Right now they're at zero outstanding with them. So you have to roll with the punches, and then you have to be able to kind of show how, well, yes, but we've actually still maintained to be flat and growing a little bit by diversifying and bringing in, new smaller businesses. So if you want to talk numbers and brass tacks, like the point being is it's more art than science. If you're going to run out of money within 12 months, you probably should be thinking about raising now. And you have to, be honest when you look in the mirror. Are you going to have a tough time fundraising? Are people clamoring to give you money? Do you have existing support from insiders? Or are you kind of starting cold and you got to run a process and you need to be building relationships? If you need to be building relationships, you should be starting that process at least, I would say at least 12 months before you need that check in the door, if not 18 months. And what I mean by that, I was talking to a founder that I met at the other Endeavor event a few weeks ago, and I told him he's moving to San Francisco. And I said, if you're looking to raise your seed round, in about a year or so, the first beginning should be just tapping into a network and just grabbing coffee with VCs, right? And building that excitement, that interest. If they say, are you raising now? Say no. Counterintuitive, right? Say no, you're not raising yet. Say, no, I'm actually just looking to meet investors and, trying to find people that I believe could add the most value to the business, and just looking to build relationships. And if you really are focused before you have to raise, where you don't have those kind of stress hormones getting excreted from you, because you don't have that urgency. If you're really focused on being cool and confident and building a relationship, having genuine conversations, if you're able to do that for a couple months, and then you go out to raise a couple months later, and that process, hopefully you can run within, ideally 3 months, short FOMO, like bang, bang. It's not always the way it works. I've had processes that drag out close to a year, especially because we have some ESG impact investors that are hyper bureaucratic that just have to tick all these boxes and do all these checks. But point being is give yourself at least a year. Desperation doesn't help. That's why it's like dating. It just isn't. Desperation is just not attractive. It's exactly like that. So you want to really try to give yourself as much opportunity to set those relationships ahead of time.
Yeah, for sure.
I
I know we have a question in the chat, but I also got one privately, so I'm just gonna ask you this one first. How do investors feel about cash outs of the founders? Like, have you ever had to negotiate that and have pushback, or?
It's a really good question. There's a balance between investors wanting you to be hungry for the future, but not too hungry that you're stressed and you can't focus on building a business. And they really want to try to strike that balance. But at the same time, if you've executed and, you raise $1 billion company by the time you hit your B round, let's say, yeah, they'll probably let you take a few $1 million off, especially if they believe that that's what they need to do to keep you engaged and to keep you building and keep you motivated. sometimes investors, you know, in me and my co-founder's case, we had the opportunity to take 250,000 off the table just because we were in debt from when we started the company. You know, we didn't start in a good baseline. And so, you know, our investors were okay. That was a pretty small amount. And it was like on a structure where it converted at a subsequent close. And then I met founders that take $1 million off the table, raising like a $30 million round, which I hadn't really seen before. And then you hear the stories of, again, people taking $30, $40 million out in secondaries in the B rounds. So it really depends on the investors, you know, your relationship with them, how motivated you are. There is no hard and fast rule. What I would say is it's probably, you know, unless you're really, really, really strong, probably not like the best piece of like, unless you know like the deal's basically done. I don't know if it would be like a starting point to say, hey, also I want to, you know, cash in this sale. Like it's really, really tricky. I would say if you're exceptional and there's a ton of demand and you have different options and you can say like, I'm looking for this amount of capital because I want, you know, to be able to get a house or do things for my family, sure. But I think I'd say be cautious with it. It is more of a sensitive tactical component. Because at the end of the day, especially if you're early stage, like they want you to prove that you're on the track before you do it. Like, you know what I mean? And so, yeah, it's a tricky one. But at the end of the day, the more leverage you have, you can negotiate whatever you want. And usually that leverage comes from being a great salesperson, drumming up a lot of interest, and also, you know, executing on building a great business.
I agree. And Adriana asked, you know, how many key advisors did you have for your pitch, and how many of them did you pay? Interesting.
Yeah, it's a good question. We never gave cash. We did kind of get, you know, by one of our pre-seed investor kind of foisted a few advisors on us at the beginning that we gave some equity to. One was valuable that we still talk to today. The other two weren't. I might not be the right person for this. I mean, it like, I get it because I mean, we had such a cold start issue. Like me and my co-founder didn't work in this industry. I mean, it was really like, I get why he told us to bring on these advisors, but we really only learned or got value from one of them. I can't remember what we gave them. It was probably something like, and it might have been pretty aggressive. Maybe it was like anywhere from 10 to 25 basis points of equity when you were starting out. Maybe that was way too much. I don't know. Maybe 5 to 10. I can't remember. Honestly, I'd have to look back. Yeah, 25 seems crazy. Maybe it was 5. I can't imagine it'd be more 5 to 10. But yeah, we had 3 of them. And they had like okay backgrounds. Like none of these were like particularly interesting blue chip people. If I could do it over again, I would, instead of finding like one of the advisors was like a former founder. He was the most valuable one, but his company failed and he was in a similar space. One was the former CEO of HSBC private bank, and one was former director of product at Square. The latter two, like if I could do it over again, I would find a founder more in my peer group that was a fucking absolute assassin that I just wanted to learn from, and I would give them that equity and say, all I want is a few hours a month from you for like coaching, development, network, and that would be the best money I ever spent. We didn't get any network value from any of them. We got a lot of like, we do get a lot of value from the former founder just on like what not to do and how to negotiate in the capital markets side. So he's been great. But I've never had a mentor or anybody really that, you know, I felt like I could build that relationship and really, you know, grow from that standpoint. I see a question here for Salvador. How much did you highlight your background, entrepreneurial experience, and Micah's entrepreneurship awards for investor your pitch, gain some confidence? Yeah, I think like your background and the entrepreneurial experience for sure. I mean, awards, I probably like if you have it on your LinkedIn, they're gonna look on your LinkedIn. Like I would say show that, not tell that. In my personal opinion, I think this whole like, you know, it's almost become a meme, the 30 under 30 type thing with how many of these founders have, you know, gone to jail recently, as even though 99% are great. I'd be careful with the awards piece, but yeah, your background and entrepreneurial experience, yeah, that's the beginning part of your story. Whether it's a great thing to share, or in my case, it's like a weird thing. Oh, this is a former trumpet player, who sold cigars. Like whatever that is, weave that into your narrative and tell a compelling story. Like make it a story that people want to listen to and that are going to be engaged with, and they're not going to be checking their email and Slack at the same time.
Yeah. And
Got it. Thank you.
thanks for asking that, Salvador. We're technically now in the Q&A part of the session. We've been doing a little bit of Q&A here and there. So with anybody that has questions, if you want to hop on with your camera on or just get off the mic and ask your question, I think now's the time to do so. So go for it. You guys can raise your hands. Anybody wants to ask any questions? Otherwise, I have one for Jacob, but
I see one from Leslie here in the chat that I can address quickly.
yeah, go for it.
Yeah, this is a really, really interesting challenge. I think short answer is, Leslie, I'd be hard pressed to give you a good answer without looking at your deck and your model and how big you think this business can be. I think, again, really, that's a great starting point. And if you don't have I know a 5-year model sounds insane. It's even insane for business at our stage. Investors want to see it. But even if it's super high level, trying to be able to extrapolate a 5-year model based on what you think you could scale and grow your business to, and then put in those equity inputs that you would need to then see to achieve that type of growth and development, that arc, your margins, your profitability, like your revenue retention, your churn, all of those types of things, that'll basically tell you whether it's an investable business and by who. So I can't really give you an answer without looking at those numbers and based on what you think you can do with it. I think getting bank financed, an SBA loan, great options. Usually they're, personal recourse in a lot of situations, whether you want to kind of take that on. Some situations you might be able to get, kind of a non-recourse business loan. I would say always debt is cheaper than equity. If you believe in your business, I would 100% do that. Usually the challenges with venture investable businesses is you can't achieve the scale or growth that you want without, big sizes of checks in order to kind of, see that, geometric growth. It's a great question. Go ahead, Katina.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Leslie, thank you for asking. And Jacob, for you was, there's a lot of terminology that has to do with fundraising, whether it's debt or whether it's equity. Did you use any specific resources to learn about these specific terms when you were first having these conversations?
Yeah, I'm a big Wikipedia, Investopedia, Anypedia, and now ChatGPT can kind of short circuit a lot of that. That was the biggest thing I realized about myself. It's like, I'm just really curious. I love learning. I can spend hours on, understanding all of these things. And I never worked in, financial services or anything like that. I never studied it. I never took math, economics, nothing. And I've had to raise, a couple $100 million from Apollo's Midcap and Castle Lake. And, we're in kind of the, asset-based finance space, and we do modified recourse factoring. And I had to learn all of these really complex terminologies and things. And I learned well on my own doing that type of research. And when I'm curious, I retain it like osmosis. Some people learn better conversationally or talking to an expert. It really depends on, what's best for you. But I think the challenge is now there's no excuse for you not to know basic things because it's just so easy. It was always easy with the internet, but it's even easier now with ChatGPT or Grok and whatever you want to do, Claude. So be prepared. I will tell you if there is something, if you're not doing the best practices that you should be doing, it's just never been more competitive to be a founder. I don't envy people starting from scratch right now because it's never been easier. It's a lot easier for people that are not going to achieve, those great heights to try to break in and build up a prototype and, try to hack around. And that's really why I keep emphasizing it's not about the product or about, the idea even. Such a hard thing to internalize. It's like, they just want their vision is you is like, no matter, it's like Sisyphean, like you're going to be pushing this boulder up a mountain relentlessly for years and years and years. And you're going to figure out a way to get to that top. And if you're that person, regardless of what the idea is now, the product, the state of the business, they will write you that check. I promise you that.
Yes, grit in the end overcomes any challenge. And there's a book I really like for founders that are just starting out. It's called Venture Deals. I read it a while ago when I was first learning here, and a lot of like founders that read it, it's like basic terminology. I'll put it in the chat in the break, but it's basic terminology on like what everything means. And then now there's like a lot of newer versions of that book, but it's like a good basic one. And in that same book, they recommend a bunch of other books. If you're also more of a book person, about
Great.
that.
Yeah, Jeffrey Busking, wrote a great book on it. There's another like learning website. There's a ton of them, and the one you just mentioned, Katina, most of it is all of the same. I would say if you get the terminology, you understand deal structure, you understand the asset class, I would then focus more on things that you can do to improve your pitch and your persona. And I would almost overthink it, like almost get to the point where you're giving yourself anxiety about being like recording your pitch and like, does my voice sound like this way? Do I use my hands too much when I talk? Like it really is. If you can become great at that, you're already ahead of 99.9% of people. It's massive, that salesmanship art.
I see Leslie, you raised your hand. Do you wanna go for it?
Yes, I want to ask a question. Jacob, you mentioned today something that it was mentioned yesterday as well. So it got my attention that the potential investor or whoever is going to be willing to put money into your business is more interested in you as a person than your product or service or business. Can you explain that a little bit? Because they toggled into that yesterday as well. How important, and you just said it, how important it is your sales pitch to communicate what your vision and your project is. Can you elaborate a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think again, and this is most relevant for venture, again, because the way the asset class works and because the way like companies are not democracies, right? They're not. They're authoritarian. The structure is oriented in the way it is with the CEO on the top so that you can make decisions quickly, right? Your big bureaucratic businesses typically are not agile and can have a lot of issues. So the whole way companies are structured, in a capitalistic environment so that you can take in capital, and then be able to grow, make decisions quickly and have that impact. So that's why VCs are really focused on that founder, typically that CEO, whoever the one's doing the fundraising, because they're the one that is really going to be making all the executive decisions to move mountains to get to that billion-dollar trajectory. And that's why it's less so of a, their deck and like the data room look like, because while VCs might not be the smartest people in the world, most of them are smart enough to know how businesses are run. And until robots and AI is doing everything, businesses are human, human dynamics. The only way that you can build a great business typically is with other people. Now, you might not need as many people as you did before now, which is great. You see, Cursor and all these companies generating hundreds of millions of ARR with 20, 30 people, but you still need people. You need culture, you need team, you need leadership. Sorry, I don't know if I'm cutting out here. Can you guys hear me? And that's why it's so important, because that's what companies are run. It's a human experience. And that's how you hire the best talent, because you meet a CEO, you meet a founder, and you're like, I want to join them on this mission. I want to take less pay. I want to take equity. I'm willing to work the 12, 14 hours. So VCs are able to take all of that experience, despite the fact they might not empathize, but they're going to be like, holy shit, this is my quarterback. This is my person that's going to lead the team down the field and get into the end zone. And that's why it really ends up being that emotional decision, because VCs also, to maybe hammer this home point a little bit more, they know even if they love you and they are willing to bet the farm on you, they know the odds are you're going to fail still. That's it. Like if you're raising venture, right? The odds are you're going to fail. They're usually okay with that, because if they think you're going to do it, whether it's not this time, then if you start another company, they want to build a relationship, guess what? They'll double down on you again. And I have a really good founder friend that's on his second company now. He's raised from every top VC, General Catalyst, Andreessen, you name it. And the analogy we like to use, because we're racing fans, we like motorsport, NASCAR, F1, is that being a founder is like being a race car driver. In the beginning, you're lucky if you're getting out of the garage in the back of the grid and you have shitty logos on your car. You know, pick a shitty brand, whatever. You have Dollar General and you have, I don't know, no slight to Dollar General. You have shitty logos. And guess what? In F1, whether you're Lewis Hamilton or Max Verstappen or whoever, you're going to crash that car. And guess what? They give you another car. And if you're doing well and you start at the bottom, you'll move up to a team with better logos, or you'll move down. But the point is, like, the reality is the car is designed to be rebuilt and to crash. Like, you're supposed to drive it to its limits. Like, they'll be more upset if you're sensitive and driving it around the track, you know, without risking. They're okay if it crashes. It's part of the sport. And the reality is second-time founders usually know how to drive better. They've learned from their mistakes. And the second car they get usually has better logos. And it's just case in point with him. His first investors were mostly no name. Now he has all those blue chip logos. So now in his car, he's got Rolex and he's got, you know, blue label scotch, whatever analogies you want to give. But Leslie, that's why it's so important on the founder, because they believe that you're like one of only a few people on the planet that could drive this car, that could build this business. And that, because ideas are easy. Everybody has ideas. There's plenty of people that can do product engineering. There's outliers in all these things. But when they're looking at you, they're saying, is this person giving me the best possible chance to turn this idea in business into $1 billion business? That's why the ideas don't really matter, because those are kind of fungible. And as much as you think you're unique and you have a secret sauce in this, most VCs don't buy that, especially now. Whether it's a business like us, where I'm doing a lending business, there's 150,000 other people do the exact same thing that we do. And you have to lean into that. And you have to explain, you know, how you're going to build these differentiating characteristics. So anyway, so there's a long-winded answer, but hopefully that gives you some other context on it. But again, if you're building a lifestyle business or you're building a non-venture investable business, just show your track record, show you're a good steward for this business, that you can take, you're detail-oriented, you have the skills and expertise to take this business. You're not trying to be the only print shop in the world, right? Then like it's a bit of a different, you know, dynamic.
Thank you. I love the analogy with the Formula One. I think it's exactly right on point in the business life. Thank you so much, Jacob.
Of course.
It's a really good one. Henadi, I know you wrote a good question in the chat, but I encourage you to get off the mic and ask it as well live.
Sure. Hi, Jacob, how are you? Really appreciate everything that your insights grateful for us. We have been incubated by Google Startup Program, NVIDIA, Microsoft, JPMorganChase, and Human AI. We are building AI guru to help founders and entrepreneurs to grow from the inside out. Also, mentorization with emotional intelligence and good stuff, new stuff. Do you think they really care beside us? Do you think the investor really care about the experience that I got from pre-seed, or they don't care about it?
It's a good question. Yeah, I think the short answer to that is they only care if it's translated into champions, like basically people at the program that have invested or want to invest more, or connecting you with people that they're like, you got to invest in this company. That's the challenge, is like the signaling doesn't work if it's like still. That's why it's kind of like dating. It's like if you're still on the market, but you have all this blue chip people involved, like why isn't Chase giving you money, or Nvidia or Google, or why aren't they clamoring to give you money if you're the best?
Because we are pre-seed.
Sorry?
Because we are pre-seed, yeah.
Yes, exactly. No, and that's the dynamic, right? Or finding like an angel investor at Nvidia that's, you know, worth a lot of money, or something. Basically, the point being is the biggest dynamic of this can be getting people in these, you know, startup programs to figure out a way to actually support you with capital, beyond maybe what that startup accelerator did. I think it's a good validation point, but again, it's you, it's not that. And that's kind of what changes. It trumps everything. I mean, that's kind of the short answer. I mean, I came out of accelerator with no brand, no, you know, things at all. And, you know, and it didn't really help. And, you know, again, the best thing you can do is still try to leverage that network, and then you're just pitching people that hopefully you get introduced to, and through that you get to create that.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Great.
I've also seen a lot of founders try to. Most of these accelerators are also a way for these companies to see, you know, a potential acquisition or a potential like solution to a problem they have internally. So as much as like you can leverage that foot in the door and continue to ask questions and stuff, so that you can convert that into a client or a potential acquirer or strategic investor, as Jacob said. You never know what doors might open, but good luck on the accelerator. Sounds pretty cool.
yeah. Yeah, it's awesome. Congratulations. And what I would say too is if you know you're a work in progress on your pitching and your selling and your networking and all of those pieces, even more important than to try to lean in commercially. I would say as much as I really want to double down the fact that you are the most important thing, nothing else at the early stages. If you feel like you're weak in certain areas, the only thing that can really drive support there is commercial trajectory. Basically showing that you hustled and grinded, got clients, got users, got whatever KPIs and metrics that are important to your business. That's way more important. Like the hardest thing for me is I had a former chief product officer who was a PM at PayPal, and he's starting a fintech company. And because his expertise was in PayPal for years in product, his whole pitch and deck was product. And I had to rip everything away, tell him nobody cares about the product. Like his name is Praj. And like Praj, people have to be understanding why you are the right one to solve this problem. And like, yes, you have a product background. They know that. They know you're going to build a good product. Nobody cares about a wireframe of a pre-seed product with no users. You can have that there in the deck, but it's just like people waste a lot of time on things that are just really, not consequential in that very, very, very initial point. Yeah, Luigi got a question.
Hey man, can you hear me?
Yep.
So I'm also part of co-creators. So I guess my question is, we're at a point that we already have users. It's a freemium version, right? We're not charging customers for our solution. So I guess what I would like to see is, do you recommend keep getting more users, like free users, as a validation and as showing that we're grinding and we're having people in and using the tool and perhaps measuring how much they use it? Or perhaps build sort of like an MVP product that we can start to charge customers for it, but then they'll make a switch in terms of the focus of the company, because that'll be like more enterprise. So what I'm saying is, we may have the opportunity to go to big companies and say, hey, we have this product for you guys, and we're going to charge you, say, $10 per user per month. So how do we prioritize in that regard?
Yeah, it's a really great question. It's nuanced from the standpoint of it again goes back to kind of your vision, right? And what you're trying to build and what is going to be your commercial and model. So to give you an example, if your business has a ton of virality and network effects, whether it's a good example like a Facebook, Instagram, or a bad example like a Clubhouse that kind of flamed out, if your business is going to be supported by ad revenue or other sponsorships, and really the user and the utility and that kind of share of wallet, whatever you're building, if your commercial model is ultimately going to be solved in some other way than the user paying directly itself, then yeah, users is the biggest North Star, and trying to capture that network effects, that growth at scale. I would say the problem, if your business is going to ultimately eventually be users paying, and this might be a really terrible analogy, but bear with me, if somebody's giving out free ice cream, even if it's terrible ice cream, like people are gonna probably like take it and eat it, like it, or free whatever sandwich, anything. Like something that's free is not necessarily a great litmus test of quality. You're gonna have metrics, yes, that can help, that can say retention, this and that, but ultimately VCs, especially now, have been a little bit, I think, disenchanted with kind of freemium models, unless, as I said, it's a part of the way that you're building these network effects and you have really, really compelling retention, user data. I would say 9.5 times out of 10, the focus should be figuring out a way to convert users to paid users and figuring out efficient go-to-market motions with, all the unit economic data, CAC to payback, LTV to CAC, margins, and be really, really clear and lucid on that, because a lot of investors will really kind of not give as much credit as you think you should be given because you have more of a freemium model.
Gotcha. But if you do that, then that is gonna open the door to maybe bootstrap and not try to get an investor, right?
What do you mean if you start
Like
charging?
if I decide, yeah, if I decided to, and that's why I want to be like so specific with the sample of, going to after certain type of companies that I know that they may have they're going to have their revenue to pay for the services that we offer, right? So if we land one of those companies, um, the necessity of getting investors are going to decrease. I might be completely off, right? I can be saying
You
like,
don't, you want to remove that. That is a big fallacy that any of you guys should take out of your mind. So like the goal is not like you don't raise money because you need money. I know that sounds like a narrative violation. You don't raise money because you need money. In fact, you want to raise money when you don't need money. You're not raising money because you need it, Luigi. You're not raising it because your product's free and your companies aren't paying. You're raising money because you're going to build $1 billion business and you need capital to hire people, grow, scale faster, build new products, reach new markets. At the end of the day, every business is really simple. Whether you're Apple, whether you're Nvidia, whether you're whoever, business at scale is simple. It's new products and new markets. You're trying to, get more revenue from your existing customers, sell them new iPhones, AirPods, Vision Pros. You're creating new products and you're trying to enter new markets, gain market share in new markets. It's that simple. Business is really, really simple. So the point is, Luigi, you're not saying, oh, I'm getting paid here and now I can bootstrap. Like, because then you shouldn't, like, if you can bootstrap and that's great. Again, you can build a great maybe lifestyle business. I don't know exactly what you're building, but no, you never want the narrative to be like you're raising because you need the money because your customers aren't paying. No, you're trying to build an absolute fucking rocket ship. And that's why you're raising money, because you're going to make whoever lucky VC in the seat across from you fuckload of money. And apologies for the language to be crude, but sometimes you need to kind of like, I really want you guys to understand that. I really, really, if you guys don't have that and you don't feel like you're going to run through a wall, it's going to be really hard. You have to believe it yourself. And that's the hardest part. How are you going to convince an investor if you don't believe you're going to be $1 billion company yourself? It's impossible. Question, does that help, Luigi? Hopefully a little bit.
yeah.
Awesome. Question from Adriana. Came from an uncommon background. What do you think the key to convincing your first investor? Yeah, I think it goes again really back to kind of hopefully what's been the central narrative here. It's like I own my background. Like in the HBS case study, it literally says like my resume was not compelling. Like you have to own that and tell a story based on that. And you have to explain why your experiences, why your track record, whether you were the Ivy League, PhD holder that excelled and did this, you got to own that and why that translated into you leaving your big expensive job and now grinding on building this, or whether you're me and you're a musician salesperson, that did this whole runaround and got really, obsessed with the idea of building a company that could impact and alleviate poverty and create jobs in emerging markets. It has to be about that narrative. And it's like, you hear it, like if you listen to Tony Robbins, any motivational speaker that you do, you can tell when you're engaged, when you're listening, when they're eloquent, when the structure is there. It really is. That's a short answer, Adriana. You like, especially for somebody in my position, I had to be in the, and one of my investors says, I'm not doing this to pump my own tires. He said, I'm the best pitch person he's ever met. And I think for somebody with my background, I had to be the best, because I'm going to be outgunned with degrees, experience, IQ, all these other things. So I need to use my strengths, which is self-awareness, emotional intelligence, and being able to try to craft the absolute most compelling pitch where when an investor is looking at 1,000 founders and 1,000 pitch decks, I'm sticking out, if nothing less, that because like, wow, at minimum, this guy's a good sales guy because I kind of want to bite. So, a lot of those dynamics is you really can't overdo that. I'm still working on this all the time. I'm a fraction of where I want to be as far as, my competency. I have not, fundraising has been an absolute grind for me. Again, like it's not easy. I'm probably not qualified enough to be giving this speech. But maybe to that question's point, I think the fact that I was like, to quickly tie on that, I only found out this couple of years ago. One partner at Antler, because of my background and Peter's background, they weren't going to write us the check. And one partner said, if you don't invest in Marco, I'm quitting my job. I'm like leaving right now and I'm done. He's like, I'm willing to stake my whole career and reputation on Marco. So I convinced one person to do it. And he never told me this. He's never like, oh, I saved your company. Like I vouched for you in that room. I heard that through another investor who's now the partner of Antler Canada, who invested as an angel investor in our company. And the irony about that is, looking back, now he's like the lead partner in the US. And out of the 30, 40 companies that were started in our cohort, there's only one other that's left, that's still alive. It's us and this other company. So not to say who knows what's going to happen with us, but he was vindicated at least through this time horizon, right? And that's why having a champion, having this. So most people in the room, they look at my background, they're like, how the fuck can I give this guy money to build a trade finance company when he's a musician and he has no context in it? But if you're able to get one person where I built a relationship with him, he got to know me, he's like, no, Jake, I know Jake is going to do everything he possibly can to make this company work and happen as hard as it's going to be. And even if he fails, I know I'm going to bet on him again, and I want to build that relationship. Awesome. Any other questions?
I was
And
just gonna
oh,
add
sorry.
something there that I think also you do a really good job at explaining how your experience is also relevant to what you do and how you build, and you speak about it when you pitch. And so, like, I think for founders especially, the beautiful thing about entrepreneurship is you don't really, like, yes, there's people that have a background that you see repeatedly, but it's also a place where, like, if you can apply your different experiences and share that story in a cohesive way about how that experience is gonna impact your entrepreneurial experience, I think there's
Absolutely.
there's definitely a story there. But a bunch of them were asking if you have a link of you pitching. I love it.
Yeah, I don't have a link. I can try to see. I mean, probably not something I'd be willing to share and circulate just because usually it has some sensitive stuff, uh but no, there's much better people at pitching than me. I'd encourage you to go to YouTube or to others, but I would say, and to Juan's point, maybe I am a good actor, and I would say again, when you're doing a lot of these exercises, I really believe for anybody that's watched film and movies, and you can see how somebody can transform an actor, that you forget that this person's playing a part. And that's a really good point because, you know, you might not be the archetype, or you might be struggling to convince yourself that you're the CEO of the company, that pitch person, right? And you can look how people transform to be able to pitch certain things. And the reality is if all of you here on the screen that you're a CEO or you want to be the CEO or that pitch person, you might need to become an actor and work on those skills, even if it's not you, to be that person. Because at the end of the day, to use again a very obvious example, you have a Steve Jobs and a Steve Wozniak, right? Like Steve Jobs, not technical, couldn't code. Obviously, he's a genius, but boy, like if you want to learn how to pitch, just watch any of his keynotes presenting the iPhone, anything. There's few people as good at that on the planet. And even Tim Cook is great now, but Steve Jobs really had this simplicity, this elegance to what he did, as much as, not a litmus test on him as a person, crazy person. Then you look at Steve Wozniak, like that guy's going to struggle to get, maybe the same level of attention, right? So if you want to be that, person profile, work on it, become an actor, practice it, present it, take cues from the greats. Look at Sam Altman, look at, Eric Lyman of Ramp is a great example. You don't want to emulate me. I'm grinding. I'm a Series A company. We only raised 30 million. Look at the people who raised billions. Look at the people that built empires. Listen to how they talk. Look at their body language, and do your best to become an actor and emulate that. I mean, that's what I try to do. I try to learn from the greats, but again, if you have to take away one thing, you won't convince anybody until you convince yourself. And that is the hardest thing to do, because we know how hard it is. We all have self-doubt. We all have our self-esteem issues. And unless you are a psychopath or sociopath, and that would probably be a huge advantage if you are. Good on you if you are oriented that way, because you have a huge edge. So, but other than that, if you're like empathetic and you know, are more logical and reasonable, you got to figure out a way to break down those barriers, whether you have to go on some retreat or, you know, meditate, whatever it is. You have to be that person. You have to convince yourself. You have to be able to be the person that's going to do nothing but run after this and be dedicated and improve. It's hard. It's not supposed to be easy. It's supposed to be grueling. You're going to have breakdowns. You're going to have sleepless nights. You're going to have tremendous anxiety. But if you're able to break down those barriers and become that raw person that is going to be able to believe in themselves, it's believing in ourselves that is the hardest person. We're the hardest person to sell. We can do that. Then raising money is not, because like you're not looking for that same validation. Like, I think that was like the big turning point for me. It's like, I don't care about the rejection. I don't care that they're wrong. I know I'm right. And like, once you then can convince your team, yourself, then you have to convince your team, right? And then you have to like get them to believe in it. And that's a daily job. We have 60 people at our company now, most of them remote. So for me to do these things in Zoom and try to get them fired up every single day is a whole other emotional endeavor, right? Before even getting into the, you know, fundraising piece where most of it is so virtual. So, you know, I really do believe that this is something that, you know, it has to just be a part of your fiber, your DNA. It can't be. What I will tell you is Antler, because this was like a, you know, when Antler started, most of the people that were there were the Stanford, you know, business school, Harvard, MIT, NASA. They literally would put all the logos from all these fancy people, McKinsey, Goldman. Everybody at this program was like, oh my God. Like, and I was like, holy shit, what am I doing here? Super impressive people. Yale Law, like you name it. And what I learned was, and the reason why a lot of these companies didn't, with all these brilliant people, they were there for the wrong reasons. They had built illustrious careers. They'd seen in the media and in the news this founder life romanticized, jet setting, you know, whatever, big deals, and the prestige of it, you know, starting a company, being your own boss, all of these trappings. And they said, wow, I've worked hard, but I went to the prep school, I went to the Ivy League, I worked at this great company. Now I'm looking for the cherry on top. Now I want to start my own company and build $1 billion business. And not one of those people succeeded for a myriad of reasons. Whether it was for they didn't have enough grit because they were used to a quality of life, you know, and a different job. They were really just looking for prestige. They weren't obsessed enough with the problem. There's a myriad of ways to look at that. But if you're able to kind of find that grit, if you're able to find that relentlessness, you're able to kind of really dig deep in yourself. You're able to build that self-confidence, you know, that self-love, you know, and that admiration for yourself for being able to really tackle these things and really drill down and focus and make the sacrifices and leverage that support system that you have. You know, you'll be able to do it because I run this script every time I look. Oh, we're way over. Rebecca's flashing on here. But last thing I'll say is I run the script to go back to myself when I was 22. And I'm selling cigars. I just moved to New York City with a music degree. I don't have any money. I'm literally couch surfing. And I imagine going and like visiting myself back then. I'm 35, now 22. I wouldn't have believed what I'm doing in my wildest dreams. And I still have a long, long way to go. But like, I wouldn't have believed in a million years. I just tell that person just to not give up. And I was great at kind of, I would always say act as if was my mantra. I was always crafting and creating a persona. And even if I didn't believe it yet, I was still acting as if, right? I was always acting as if. And sometimes you do need to act to Juan's point until you can start to believe it and see it and feel it and then see the way that people in the market respond. But anyway, I appreciate everybody for the engagement and thanks Katina and Rebecca having me. Hopefully this added some value.
It was amazing. Round of applause, virtual round of applause for Jacob. No, thank you so much. So much for your time.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah, thanks so much for taking the time, for sharing your story. Always super inspiring, always so multifaceted. We all admire you as a founder, Jacob. We'll believe in you and excited to keep working with you. So round of applause if you guys want to find more about Marco, about Jacob. I'll send like information about them as well as the resources. Jacob, you can stay and listen to the second part. You can go, but good luck with today building Marco as always.
Yeah, great to meet all of you. Yeah, Katina will share my LinkedIn and stuff. But best of luck to all of you. And thanks for having me today. Good luck. Bye for now, guys.
Thank
Bye,
you very
Jacob.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, guys. Thank you so much for being so interactive, asking so many questions. Glad to hear the positive feedback. Given that we're running a little bit behind, but good, we're gonna take a 4-minute break. Be back here around 11:40 because Alex is gonna hop on then, and we're gonna start with the second part. So yeah, take a break, relax, enjoy. I'm gonna put a little bit of music, and then we'll see each other in like 3 minutes. Hey, everybody. Let's get back in here. Hey, Alex, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Doing good, doing good. We were just taking a little bit of a break here before we kick this off. But everybody, welcome back to the second part of our session. I'm gonna do as like last time a little bit of intro, and then Alex has some really insightful knowledge to share. Then we're gonna open it. I'm gonna ask some questions in the chat. And yeah, also a very interactive session. Okay, so Alex is a multifaceted person, endeavor mentor, operating partner at Revolution Ventures. He invests in many early stage companies. As you can see here in his bio, he's in a lot of boards, companies like Casted, Grid, and Pixel. an observer at ESOP, Stream AI, and Mint House, past roles in Wagmu, Seal, and HomeSnap. He's also in the board of Creti and then Innovation Council of the Urban Land Institute. He mentors with Endeavor with us, and we're really grateful for that, with Techstars, with John Hopkins at the Fast Forward Accelerator, and was named 2024's 40 Under 40 Raising Star by Venture Capital. Yay, go Alex. For sure, very smart individual. I'm very excited for what he's gonna share with us. Alex, thank you so much for your time here. Why don't we kick it off by you sharing a little bit about maybe things that we didn't mention in this bio, and then I hear you have some interesting capital market insights for us to kick it off.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the warm introduction. Excited to be here today. I know we've got a diverse crowd and probably companies at different stages in their journey. So while I think we'll sort of go through the presentation and start with kind of a macro overview, as well as dive into some specific topics about how do you raise capital, who are your investor archetypes, what's the right way to raise capital, because sometimes getting money in the door is not always the best thing for the business if it comes in the wrong form. And then I certainly want it to be as interactive as possible as well. So while we kind of reserve questions for the end, feel free to kind of insert stuff into the chat. And if I can weave that into the conversation as we go, I'm more than happy to do that, because this is really a forum for you and a forum to probably ask questions that you might not otherwise ask investors. So please feel free to be as open as possible.
For sure, awesome. Do you want to kick us off with a little bit of insights about, statistics about the market? You want me to start off with asking a little bit of questions from the group?
Why don't you start off with questions? I know we were going to try and do a little bit of a poll. Don't know if that's possible to do, but why don't you kick it off, and then I will cover a little bit of the landscape.
Awesome. I was trying to put this poll together, but I'm gonna ask everybody to put in the chat if you can share with us one or two of the topics that you really want to talk to Alex about the most, or want to hear about the most right now. Put it in the chat in the next 1 or 2 minutes, and then from there we're gonna maybe kick off with some of these topics. Go for it, everybody. Put in the chat. I was trying to create this poll, not working, but we're gonna do it old school.
Great. And while you guys are busy doing that and thinking about the key topics, let me sort of start off with maybe a little bit of a macro overview in terms of what's happening in the venture category today. I mean, I think it's easy to sort of get lost in the headlines that you read in TechCrunch and other media, because it seems like every other day someone's raising 25, 50, or $100 million and capital's flowing everywhere again. But I think the reality is actually the opposite of that. So, back in 2020, 2021, peak VC market, we ultimately got to a high of about $100 billion of capital that was being deployed per quarter, and around 5,000 deals a quarter. Since then, over the last 2 years, we've averaged back down to kind of pre-pandemic times, which was roughly around $45 to $50 billion a quarter. There was sort of a standout quarter last year in Q4, but deal count has continued to decelerate and has dipped below kind of the 3,000 mark per quarter. So certainly there's been sort of a pretty large correction in terms of the dollars and the deals that are happening in the market. But that's not enough. I think the market then pretty sharply bifurcates between AI and everything else. So if you're truly an AI company, and I mean not just a business that sort of overlaid AI on something that you've been doing for a couple of years now, or added .ai to your name, the market looks fundamentally different for you than if you're a non-AI native company. The average round for a business outside the AI category is about $20 million. For AI, it's closer to 35. So a pretty material step up. And that also, I think, explains kind of the bump in dollars going into the category late last year, because most of that are these large AI rounds that you're reading about in the media. What's even more interesting, and we're kind of back to a little bit of froth in terms of valuations, but the average early stage pre-money valuation's about 100 right now. For an AI company, it's 250. So 2.5 times more. So take that for what you want. I mean, I'm talking about more at the Series A, Series B stage than at the pre-seed or seed stage, but I think it's indicative in terms of the philosophy and how investors are thinking about the market today. But I think the through line and why I'm kind of walking you through this is because basically, if you're not an AI company, half the market is effectively unavailable to you in terms of capital and deal count. And the other half that is available, I would argue, is going to companies that are growing 100% or more each year. So kind of the infamous venture phrase of triple, triple, double, double, are maintaining relative capital efficiency, right? So if you're not one of those two things, the VC market is actually a pretty challenging place to raise capital these days. And all you have to do is kind of look at what's happening in distressed rounds. You know, towards the end of last year, we were an all-time high in terms of pay-to-play rounds. And those are situations where existing investors basically need to write another check or they get wiped out by the new investor. That inched up to closer to almost 10% of all deals. And down rounds, which are a repricing of companies, hit an all-time high in Q1 of last year, nearly like a third of all rounds. So effectively 1 in 3 deals, the valuation was changing to be a down round. Now, as people have taken their medicine and that stabilized, we've taken down to closer to a little bit under 20%. But that's still effectively 20% of rounds that are happening in the market today are repricings of prior rounds. So I hope the takeaway here is not that like things are incredibly rosy, and I hope that your fundraising approach and processes are easier than I've described. But I think it's sort of easy to get lost in the psychology of like, oh my God, all these other people are raising capital and I can't seem to get anything put together. This is kind of the stuff that no one tells you, which is the market is in a pretty tough shape right now, particularly for early stage companies that are like not on the Rolodex of the main VCs, have kind of hustled their way to product market fit or thinly capitalized themselves, don't have institutional investors around the table. Because right now we're kind of in a market where investors are looking for the easy button and reserves are tight, and those reserves are being allocated to kind of the high growth AI companies or something that feels more later stage, more de-risked, has very tight metrics. So, you know, with that preamble, it's not to scare you, but I think knowing the reality sort of helps inform the best strategy for how you fundraise. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about today.
100%. And I think it's always good, as you said, in order to craft your strategy. From the questions in the chat, there were 3 or 4 questions around pitch, deck, and pitch. So, you know, what are the key things in a pitch? What is important to have in a pitch deck? I think if we can tackle that first, and then there are 2 to 3 questions that are, you know, more about like the general like approach of raising funds, researching investors, and like a little bit more about you personally, what's something that is interesting you in your investment thesis. But yeah, we can start with the pitch deck, and then I also have some questions for you.
Yeah, so you know, your pitch deck is usually the first thing an investor sees. So obviously it's a little bit of a first impression mechanism. It has to be tight. It has to articulate your story well. I think the mistake that I see a lot is that there's sort of a lack of focus on unit economics, metrics, fundraising history, and then the deck ends with an outrageous ask in terms of the amount of money that you're raising, as well as sometimes even a valuation that you've set for yourself. I think that's a mistake. I mean, I'm just of the opinion that you should let the market speak and just be very thoughtful about how much you put in terms of your target round size, because oftentimes people will look at that, and if they feel like that's disproportionate to your scale or it's outside the sweet spot of how they think about their investment strategy, they're not even going to read through the deck the second time to really get an understanding of what you're doing. So there's all these signaling elements that are in your deck that I think people don't really fully appreciate. But you know, even if you're a super early stage company, you know, pre-seed, seed, hopefully you've got a little bit of traction. It doesn't mean you have to have a ton of data, but you kind of have to get to the heart of what investors care about most, which is, you know, how are you acquiring customers? Like, what are your customer acquisition costs? What are your margins? if you're a market by market expansion type company, like how do you think about market opening, ramp, and expansion? Basically trying to understand, like, how do you make money, right? So if a dollar comes into the business, how does that dollar get spent? What does it generate? And a reasonable, I would say, forecast in terms of what you think different dollars into the company yield in terms of revenue and growth. The whole point is not to over-engineer it, but leaving the stuff out of the deck is just unhelpful because people are trying to gauge how mature the business is and how repeatable it is, right? So even if you're not quite there yet, and you're in the tens of thousands of revenue or sub $500,000, sorry, of revenue or ARR, trying to create as much specificity as possible about who your customers are, what are those contract sizes, what are the margins on those different contracts, how you think about customer acquisition, and where are you spending your time? Is it an enterprise strategy, an SMB strategy? Like, I would spend most of my time on that. I think a lot of people spend a lot of their time on TAM, which is of course important, but you don't need to have a third of your deck be market slides. And then obviously I think a lot of people err on the side of trying to add a lot of stuff about product and functions and functionality. I think a couple slides on that with the rest going into an appendix is really the way to bridge that gap, because people of course want to understand what your product is, but they're not going to dig into what your product really does unless it kind of checks all these other boxes. So you want to put that in an appendix, be as descriptive as you want to be, give people the data, but I wouldn't have 2/3 of the deck be market and product and then one slide on unit economics and then your ask. So part of this is kind of telling the story the way you would get on a pitch and talk about it, but being a little bit more tactical in terms of giving people answers to the questions that they're going to have when they get on a first call, and trying to help them get to that conclusion sooner rather than later. Your job is to kind of pique their interest, right? So if they see interesting metrics, they see relative capital efficiency, they see the fact that you haven't raised a lot of money and you're being reasonable on your ask, like, that's kind of what gets you a first call.
Thank you for that. That's really good. And if any of you have any follow-up questions, you can put in the chat. But the other topic was, what have you seen in the best founders in terms of how they raise funds?
Yeah, it's a dynamic question.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
listen, some people are just naturally really great fundraisers, and they might not have any sort of support or numbers to even back that up, but they do a very good job telling the story and sort of captivating the minds of investors. And I think part of that is just kind of being self-reflective and figuring out whether you're one of those people or not. And if you're a really great fundraiser, like, great, you're going to have a lot of great conversations, and your job is to kind of sell the sizzle. Particularly the earlier that you are, the better you can frame the story and the market opportunity and why you're different relative to your competitors. Like, that's what's going to get you in the door. If you're not one of those people and you need a lot of practice to be able to sort of be in the room, be in the heat, answer very specific questions, have to memorize a lot of data, I think that's sort of a cue for, you just need to do some really intense prep. And what I would say is, when you start pitching, I would even say go to the investors that are going to say no, right? But use those folks as target practice. So sometimes that means even going to, big names, if you can get a call there, appreciating that they're probably going to be a pass, but just trying to understand what questions these people are asking you and using it as a relationship building matter. So as long as you kind of tune your psychology to not be like, oh man, that call went poorly, and use it like, oh, I need to get through 50 of these calls so that by the time I then sharpen my focus on who's really going to be an investor in my company, like, I know all the answers to all the questions that are probably going to get asked, and your pitch is incredibly tight. And I would also then say, I think in my experience, founders who are not comfortable pitching or telling the story and need more practice, to the extent you can really memorize a lot of numbers and sort of root your story in data rather than storytelling, that tends to help, because then you just come across as someone that knows their numbers. And even if you fumble in terms of big vision stuff, you can still come across as a pretty thoughtful founder who like understands their business. You know, the worst case scenario is that you're a bad storyteller and you don't know your numbers. That's usually when disaster strikes.
Yes, exactly. No, this is great advice. And it's in relation to this third question somebody posed, which is, how do you research the right type of investor? We have a little bit of everything. We have some technology and product companies here. We have some service providers, a couple of nonprofits. So, you know, what's the right way, especially in this market, as you were saying, it's a little bit of a different market. So how would you go about like researching those right investors?
Yeah, well, there's sort of like who are practically going to be your first investors versus who are the investors you want to build a relationship with ahead of your seed or Series A. And, you know, if you're kind of raising your first $500,000 or $1 million of capital, you know, that capital is likely going to come from friends and families, individuals, and kind of strategic investors. And by strategics, I mean individuals out of those strategics who like understand the category, not kind of corporate venture capital arms of strategics or things like that. I mean, that's really where you're going to find your money. I would then sort of spend your time talking and building relationships with the pre-seed and seed funds, with the off chance that, you know, maybe one of those people back you and sort of lead around with a $250,000 or $500,000 check. But the more smaller checks you can collect, so that your story is, you know, I'm raising $500,000, I've got half of it already subscribed, and I'm either looking for someone to fill out the other half, or I'm looking for 3 or 4 other people to fill out the half, is better than I'm looking for the first 250, and then I'm going to go and find the people who can fill out the rest of the round, right? Because, you know, the unique part of this world is very few people want to go first, but everyone goes second. So to the extent that you can kind of arm yourself with as much traction, as much momentum as possible, people don't want to feel like they're the first ones to take a bet, particularly when what they're effectively underwriting is your ability to execute. And the only people who can really underwrite that are the ones that you've spent your career building relationships with, or people who know you well. But I'm not saying don't build relationships with institutional firms, but, you know, if you're trying to raise $1 million of capital, you don't need to be spending time talking to people like me. You know, you can start having those conversations after you raised your $1 million. So I would just be very precise in terms of, you know, if it's 0 to 1, it's a lot of individuals, it's a lot of individual strategics, it's probably the smaller family offices, and it's the pre-seed funds, right? If you're raising from 1 to 3, then it's group 1 plus the pre-seed and seed funds, kind of more double down on that. And then ultimately you want to start building relationships with Series A funds. That's sort of lens number 1. Lens number 2 is, you know, to the extent that they've backed companies in your category and maybe even sort of competitors of yours, that's usually a good sign, because that means they care about the category and it's a fit. But if you're a healthcare company or a healthcare IT company talking to an investor that does, you know, software and consumer deals, that's never done a healthcare deal in the past, I probably wouldn't waste your time, unless like it's a really great relationship, or you think that there's some angle in terms of why those folks make you special. But, you know, the point of me trying to go through those statistics in the beginning is to just highlight that, you know, even within these funds themselves, allocations are few and far between. I think my view of the world right now is that whatever reserves are left, whatever's capital to be is deployed, the majority of that is, of course, getting channeled into the AI category, right? So unless you can kind of strike that nerve, it's tough. And then you're kind of in this other bucket. So if it fits within their portfolio dynamic and it fits within their underwriting criteria, that's great. If it doesn't, I'm not saying don't talk to them, but I would deprioritize them in the list of how you think about outreach. It's sort of as simple as that. And unfortunately, you know, if you've got a board or you've got investors on your cap table that can be warm introductions and help curate that investor outreach list, or of course, you know, Endeavor does a fantastic job of helping you guys with this, that's great. But if you're kind of on your own and you're trying to build your network, there's really no substitute for kind of time and grind. I mean, it's a lot of research, it's a lot of cold outreach. I would spend as much time as possible trying to form kind of warm introductions into accounts that you want to get in touch with. And even if they're not super warm introductions, an introduction from someone who has, you know, met that person 3 years ago, if they're connected and can send a note, is still better than you reaching out cold. Because if you're reaching out cold, it just goes into a separate funnel, and maybe an analyst or an associate will look at your deck. But try and always find a warm or even a cold inbound way to kind of get in front of these people. I've also found that, you know, LinkedIn has just become a transformative tool. And uniquely, I've heard lots of success stories with people subscribing to Sales Navigator, which is now being used by a lot of companies for customer acquisition, basically using that for their fundraising. So they create all these lists of investors and firms, they follow them, they send them messages, and it becomes sort of like a CRM outreach effort. And most people are on that platform, and the response rate is pretty good. So it's kind of a creative way to potentially get outside of the cold outreach problem. So if you're not like a LinkedIn premium subscriber, it might make sense for you to do that.
I like that. And for, you know, for the ones that are, I would say, like, maybe are not so venture capital traditional, like it's a company that is probably not gonna be as a fit for a VC. And given the markets, like, do you think they should go focus more on a bootstrapping, or, you know, go the venture debt? Or
it's a great question. You know, being a VC, I'm actually oftentimes advise companies to not take VC money, because you have to be a specific profile of company, particularly in today's environment, to not only be an attractive sort of investment for these firms, but then you have to appreciate that with VC money comes VC expectations. And if you're a services business that's become a tech-enabled services business, or you've bootstrapped yourself to product market fit, and of course, it would be helpful to raise a couple $1 million, you really have to question yourselves in terms of, is it worth it? Because at that moment, even if you can raise capital, you know, now you've got a board, now you've institutionalized your company, and whatever price you set for yourself comes with expectations of growth, because that's how VCs underwrite, right? It's sort of predicated off of your ability to hit certain metrics 24 or 36 months out once you've burned through that capital. And the problem that I see is that naturally, most funds sort of invest on this power curve concept. And if you are not one of those companies that keeps up with their growth, you sort of get orphaned in the venture world. And it's a shame when you have a great sustainable companies that raise VC money, you know, and know in advance that they're 20, 30, % growers a year, and then raise money and they're expected to grow 100% a year, and then they grow 30, and then become kind of these stranded assets in the venture world. You just don't want to do that. And there's other pockets of capital that you can use to finance your companies, whether it be debt, or you just kind of grow more organically and leverage family office money, then tap the growth equity category, and ultimately raise private equity. So all I'm trying to say is VC is not sort of the mecca. It's a good source of capital for a lot of companies, but it's also a bad source of capital for a lot of companies. And that's why it's sort of hard to be generalist on panels like this to talk about this topic, because it's so business specific. But I can tell you that if you're a company right now that controls its own destiny, doesn't have a board, hasn't raised money, doesn't have a valuation, you're growing organically, even if you're growing slowly, like, you might want to stay that way. Unless there's a real big impetus as to why, if you don't raise money from venture, you're going to get outpaced by competitors, you're going to become defunct, or something drastic is going to happen to your business. So I'm certainly more conservative when it comes to this question. And I know that people always try and keep up with their friends and peers who are raising $5, $10, $15 million financings. But you forget the fact that 90% of those companies fail 36 months later.
That's no, that's great advice. There's a founder in the Florida network, it's called Evermundo, that they were bootstrapped and then they exited, and the founder like talks about his why they continue to be bootstrapped for many years. And it's an interesting point of view. So I encourage you all to maybe look it up in YouTube. There was one question that's a little bit like talking more about you personally. And so I do want to ask it, and then we can go into more questions. But what's your current investment thesis? Which verticals or sectors do you feel most excited or confident about right now?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm more of a thematic sourcer, and I spend most of my time really at the intersection of three categories, and those are built world, prop tech, consumer marketplace, and software. So all naturally software or data-driven businesses at heart, but those that either touch upon the consumer side of the equation or the built world. So think about things like hospitality tech or restaurant tech or e-commerce enablement, things like that. And certainly I spend my time focused on Series A, Series B businesses. So on average, these are probably companies that are certainly north of $1 million of revenue or ARR. I'd probably argue even closer to 2 or 3 at the low point, and then kind of go up from there into the low teens.
Awesome. We don't have any more questions in the group chat, so I'm happy to jump in with some of our guided questions, or if you want to jump in and share some other stuff.
No, go ahead.
Awesome. So the bucket that I'm going to talk about right now for everybody, or the subtopic, is going to be more around like, who's your investor? So my first question is, many founders get excited about like big names. And we talked a little bit about it, but like, how do you define the right investor for you and your type of business outside of, like the Series A to pre-seed kind of thing? You talked a little bit about like matching the thesis with the industry. Is there anything else in terms of defining the right fit that you would think it would be good to know?
Yeah, I mean, this is not going to be an enlightening statement, but the best investors are the ones that understand your company and category the best, right? And even if those folks want to invest at a lower valuation, I would argue to say that that's probably a better fit than going with just a brand name platform. Because remember, most venture firms, their portfolio construction is this power law concept, right? They bet on a lot of stuff. They quickly walk away from things that require elbow grease and that are not working, and continue to double down on the things that are growing fast, right? So the worst case outcome is that you become one of these statistics that effectively can't get help from their board and investors, and are then stuck in a company that is mispriced, where no one wants to write another check, and you're out in market trying to raise capital against that dynamic. That's really, really hard to do. So you kind of want to find people that aren't like that, at least to start, right? Where you're really trying to find partners who are going to help you kind of institutionalize and build the business at the earliest stages, right? So people who tend to be more hands-on, right? Who you get into a pitch and they're the ones sort of asking very intelligent questions, have the right network to connect you with the right partners, and not even saying capital partners, strategic partners, and can just be truly your thought partners in building the business. That's really hard to do, but it's hard when you're fundraising, because of course you're asking for money, and money is hard to come by. But try and interview your investors as much as they interview you. Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with you asking for a reference or two of other companies that they worked with. Try and figure out who that knows these investors. Do some back channel references. I mean, anything possible for you to just get a sense of how they work with companies. Is it really just a check, or are they going to spend real time helping you get to the next level? So that's really where the decision point comes in. And once again, I appreciate that in the beginning, it's just, get that first $500,000 or $1 million on the balance sheet. So it's hard to be very disciplined about that. But I wouldn't lose that line of thinking. I mean, you don't want to take capital from the wrong person, because that'll just be a headache for you for the next 5 to 8 years.
100%. I like what you mentioned. And what's your take on building relationships early with investors? Like, when is it too early? When is it too late? Like, is it the right strategy?
Yeah, I mean, listen, if you're a pre-seed or seed company, that hasn't raised the seed round yet or a pre-seed round, like you shouldn't be talking to Series A investors. I mean, that's just my view. Fundraising is incredibly time consuming. And so, it's hard to sort of peg what the right number is, but I would allocate 6 to 12 months to raise money right now. And arguably, it's even more for companies that like I said, aren't kind of plugged into the VC ecosystem and don't have existing investors or boards. So it's a pretty long lead time. At the same time, you're human capital and capital constrained. You're taking your eye off the business. You have a risk of not hitting your metrics or not growing. So it's a balance, right? Which is why you don't want to just rush to market and try and scorch the earth and talk to everyone, because you're going to spend 3 to 6 months doing all the wrong calls. And then you're going to be disappointed. Your confidence is going to be shaken. And it's not necessarily that you can't raise. You just have been talking to the wrong part of the universe. So I'm very much a like step-by-step kind of guy. And you want to get as much capital, soft committed. You don't have to have them set a valuation or even agree to what terms they're going to invest. But the more demand you can build for yourself, you can then sort of figure out, okay, what's the likelihood of raising amount X or amount Y? And then that'll inform who you talk to and what ultimately the form is for that money to come in. But, balanced against casting a little bit of a wider net, largely for training and relationship building purposes. Because what will inevitably happen is you'll talk to, 50 investors, and you'll mentally realize that you don't want to talk to 30 of them ever again, but the other 20 will basically go on your list for next time. And that way, I think a really good mechanism that a lot of companies use is if they have the time to write kind of quarterly or biannual investor updates. I would ask at the end of the conversation, like, I understand that this is too early for you. Would you be interested in being part of our update list? Most people will say yes, put them in there. And then when you send those newsletters out or updates, a lot of people read them. So it's just a good way, without doing a lot of fundraising work, to stay on the radar of people that you're going to want to talk to again.
Yeah, that's actually, and those well built are a really easy way to share with investors what you're up to. And when a founder reaches out to you, for instance, like, what do you say is the best way for them to get your attention or be able to form that relationship with you? I know each investor is a little bit different, but if you can give some insight onto like what usually gets you to connect with somebody, that it could be a cold email or a warm introduction.
It has to be, I understand everyone's pressed for time, but this is where sort of curation comes in, which is, it's very easy to tell a generic email that's being blasted to 1,000 investors. And oftentimes in that email, you say things, or founders say things that are just at odds with how that firm invests or thinks about, or it's a different scale of the business. So it's sort of like a missed opportunity, because you show that you're not doing the work to understand who you even want to speak to. Of course, if it's a warm referral by someone that I know, that usually helps at least me sort of spend some time and look at the deck and make sure that it's a fit. But we obviously do a lot of sourcing from conferences and cold outreach. But that's where a thoughtfully crafted note that says, hey, I saw you focus on these categories, you're on these boards, we're playing in this similar category, you might resonate with what we're doing. 3 or 4 bullets in terms of, like, here's our scale of the business. Here's where we think we're going to be at the end of the year. Here's how much capital we've raised, and here's what we're looking for now. Because sometimes it's not that it's not interesting or interesting. It's more just like, you're just too early, right? Or the metrics aren't there for what we're doing, or it's a different category of interest. Like, it's just not a vertical that we invest in. And you'll get that reaction right away, and they'll save you a cycle. But I also, it's a pet peeve of mine. It's like, we grew 530%, from what? From $20 to $300? Like, say the number. We're at $300,000 of revenue or ARR growing at X%, or, we doubled revenue from last year. But people get cute in all sorts of ways. It's unhelpful. In fact, I think most VCs appreciate reading between the lines. That just means that you don't have the traction that they're looking for.
Yeah, better be straightforward, right? Because at some point they're gonna find out.
Yeah, well, and the other thing is, it's just part of the market evolution right now,
yeah,
which is people are incredibly time and capital constrained, right? So if your one shot to capture their attention is them reading that email, you don't want to have them go do more work. And I don't really understand why founders don't want to say, yeah, we're $300,000 of revenue or something. Like, I understand that maybe they perceive that to be weak, but if they did their job and they're talking to the right sort of VCs, all the companies those guys are talking to are at $300,000 of revenue. So it's helpful for them to know that. Or if they're like me and it's like, no, it's just sorry, thank you, sounds interesting, but call us once you get closer to your Series A. Otherwise, people are just not really gonna even spend the time to understand what 300% growth means, because they're gonna look at your email or they'll look at the deck that's attached. They're not gonna see any revenue numbers in there, and that's a surefire signal to know that you're like pre-revenue or have a couple pilots.
super true, and that saves the conversation on both ends, right? Moving on to like a topic. Oh, we got a question from Adriana. What is your perception of the age of founders if they're older than 45?
First time I've gotten a question like that. I mean, me, I don't care. We play to win. Who cares? Doesn't matter. I mean,
I agree.
I think if there are people who care about that, discontinue your conversations with them.
Yes, 1,000%. Especially nowadays, they're like more than ever you see such a diversity in builders and everything. So
right. And I think, maybe a contrarian statement, but I think you get fooled by all these companies that are getting funded out of Silicon Valley, which are a bunch of young kids coming out of, grad school or having spent a couple of years at Meta or whatever. So I understand how that can create that perception. But most sophisticated investors, like, I don't know, you guys probably have better data than I do, but I think like the average age of entrepreneurs, certainly like in the late 30s, if not early 40s. So if that's the reason why you think people are not investing, it's either a bad reason or you're just talking to people, but that should not matter. It's all about your experience and what you've built.
1,000%. Moving on to like a second bucket of questioning, which is more around like raising the right way.
Yeah.
There's a question here that's a little bit more technical. So founders often focus on getting around, but what's the danger of mispricing the round?
Yeah. So the danger is you get like those charts I went through, or I didn't go through them, but I gave you the numbers in terms of down rounds or pay to play financings. Like, those are pretty painful situations. And by the way, like, you're lucky if you get one of those at that point in time, because you're kind of stuck as this company that's overcapitalized, mispriced, no existing investor support, and you haven't achieved the right proof points in terms of growth to be able to raise. So that becomes a really challenging situation, because you effectively get forced to either cut to break even or sell the company, or worse, wind down. So that's really the danger, which is going out of business. And I think that people don't think about that early on, because they just feel like, if I raise money once, I've now got the ingredients to raise money again. But my view is, like, VC is increasingly this fast money game, right? So to my earlier point, unless the growth keeps up with the amount of capital and the valuation at which you're raising that capital, you quickly get left behind. That's the danger of venture. So what does that really mean? I mean, there's two ways to raise money, right? There's price rounds, and then there's notes and saves. The earlier you are, obviously, notes and saves tend to be the mechanism by which you kind of get that first million or two in the door. But the biggest fallacy in venture is that those securities don't set the price for the company. Not true. That's your cap. That creates the signaling noise into the market that says, I raised at a 10 cap. That means my company's worth at least 10 million. And when investors look at that number, they're doing the mental math to say, okay, 10 is kind of the floor. These guys will never accept an offer for 10 because it's dilutive. So that means they're probably expecting a value of 15. Can I get to 15 on this company given what I see in the traction? Nope, pass. And this sort of replacement of priced equity by using these notes and safes has been like the worst trend in venture, which is it feels like free money until it's not. And most founders don't do the math to actually understand the dilution implications of what that ultimately means. Because newsflash, when you ultimately do raise a price round, you're going to take all that dilution first. Then you're going to take the dilution for an option pool increase, and then you're going to take the dilution for the new money when the new investor comes in. So you end up in these situations where people raise money under these stacked notes and safes, and then they ultimately raise a priced round, and the founders go from owning 90% to 10% of the business, and they're like, how? Well, it's because you've taken that dilution already. You just don't really realize it. But that is sort of problem one. Problem two is it's a surefire way to misprice your company without even having to ever raise true venture money. So while it might feel painful to you, if you're a $0 million revenue business and you're just starting out, chances are you're probably going to raise on something like a $5 to $10 million cap safe or note, discount like 20% standard. I wouldn't play games with that. But then that means, depending on whether you're a software business or a services business or a marketplace business, you have to hit a growth profile where you grow into that valuation. So effectively, if you're a SaaS company, like ideally, you're going to have to get to as close to $2 million or so of ARR as possible to be worth 10. And if you burn through that money and you get to $500,000, you're kind of screwed. And then you're going to have to raise another note and safe. And that's where the sort of death spiral begins. So the gold standard is try and raise priced equity, even from the start. I mean, I've seen all kinds of things. I've seen people raise at $2-3 million valuations, like kind of whatever it takes. But just remember that you're also not raising a lot, right? And if you're bringing in quality people that are really going to be helpful in propelling you to the next journey, you just don't want to misprice your company early on. That's kind of what I'm trying to tell you. So whether you do a price financing or through a note of safe, the dangers are different, but the through line is the same, which is just make sure that at the end of that capital, by the time you burn it, you've grown into whatever value you've put on yourself. Because if you haven't, you've just made your life harder in 24 months to then be able to raise that money.
I agree. We have a couple of questions from the audience. So the
Please.
first one is by Stefan. What would be the fundraising strategy for a startup with bigger seed costs that won't start generating revenue until product launch? So probably he's
Sorry.
referring more to like a medical product.
Can you repeat that again? I missed the first part.
Yeah, sorry about that. My internet is a little choppy. For companies like a medical product company, entertainment, or somebody that has like larger costs at the beginning, what would be the fundraising strategy, given that they won't see revenue for quite a while? Like, so a lot of biotech, right? They see this, like the first couple of years, no revenue, but you need a lot of money. So what would be the strategy there?
Yeah, I mean, find investors that understand that. I mean, you're not going to get a software investor to invest in that type of company when there's no real path to immediate monetization, right? So once again, it kind of goes back to the fit with your investors, because people who've invested in medical devices or the entertainment business, they understand it's transactional revenue, and you basically have some capex outlay, and then you do an event, and then that's how you generate revenue. It all just kind of ties back to like, do they back those business models or not? Of course, it's harder if you're a business like that to overcome the cold start problem, because you need an early group of believers to do the first thing that then is going to prove whether you have a real business or not. But usually that's the friends and family and people who know you that are going to be able to help you figure that out. And I feel like I've made this mistake in the past myself in terms of fundraising, but you think you need like all the perfect proof points. And of course, if you can do that, great. But you just need some proof points, because the expectation is not that everything is going to be perfect, but you need to be able to support the story that you're telling. And even if it's not, picking on the entertainment example, maybe this is not even the right example, but you don't have to launch a mega event to start. Even if it's like one or two small community oriented things, that's very capital efficient, where you just get people to show up and you can then talk about the engagement. You can use that in support of your thesis. That's kind of what you have to do, because everyone appreciates you're not going to, raise $1 million and launch a big thing and then it'll be a success. I mean, great if you can do that.
Yeah, now a lot of I like what you said. It also takes a lot of product testing. I think that's the main part. On the medical side, like Stephen, I've seen a lot of companies here in Florida like get a lot of grant money at the beginning, to help them the first few years, or like foundations. They do like testing or product testing with a lot of like medical schools that there's a lot of in Florida.
Yeah.
So there's like ways to do it with also not having like investor capital, or like purely like for a full product, as you said, Alex, and stuff. A
Yeah.
lot of investors in Florida like the pre-FDA stuff. So you never just get into the right crowds. And have
No, that's a great point. I mean, lots of non-dilutive funding available, as well as, I mean, no shortage of pitch competitions, which are time
yes.
consuming, but that's a way to get, $50, $100, $200,000 type commitments and grants to be able to fund your company. But like, healthcare is not really in my bailiwick, so I'm gonna get over my skis in terms of my knowledge of that category pretty quickly. But that is a very specialized place, even in the venture world. I mean, there's just funds that do that work and everyone else doesn't, right? So you probably don't need to spend a lot of your time talking to generalist VCs. Like, you need to kind of laser your focus, if you're in that field, on funds that specifically do biotech or medical devices or healthcare IT, who are going to be the guys that can effectively put you in the right doors. It's just a very specialized part of the world.
Yeah, that's a really good point, especially with the companies that have like a lot of cost at the beginning. You get it when it tends to be very like either hard tech or like some sort of a lot of R&D situation. There's very specified investors for that. Adriana had another question. During the early stages of a company,
Yeah.
how should founders be paid? Investors, what percentage do you expect in this area with the rest of the team? I'm assuming it's compensation, but
Yeah. Well, I mean, pay yourself as much as you can afford to pay yourself is really the answer. But listen, there's one's equity, which is you're going to split that however you're going to split that, and that's up to you. I mean, there's data out there that sort of shows averages. I mean, you can look, Carta has done a lot of work around this in terms of the split between founders and how that works. That might just be helpful if you're kind of starting your team and building your company, give you some proof points in terms of how others have done it, but that is largely up to you. I mean, investors don't necessarily, I think, care, as long as everyone is incentivized properly and fighting for the same cause. Yeah, in terms of cash comp, it all depends on how much revenue your business is generating. I mean, you certainly want to be conservative. I mean, I've seen everything from 0 to kind of average market salaries, but certainly below what you would expect if you were an equivalent role. If you were kind of out working for a big tech company and making, large 6-figure salaries. I mean, you kind of don't want to do that, because then it also sends the wrong signal, which is you're greedy, right? I mean, people here the whole point is you're working for the equity value, not the cash value. And the way these things work out is once the round gets raised, that compensation becomes a question with your board and investors. And the more sophisticated and more mature you get, there's a compensation committee, and like you're on that path, but that is a conversation between you and investors. So in the early part of the journey, it's more like a signaling risk, which is, you don't want to overpay yourself. I mean, you should pay yourself a living wage, and if you can pay yourself more, great. But you should really be investing in the business, and that's what the investors are gonna look for. And if you can't pay yourself anything, then you can't pay yourself anything. That's part of the trade here.
That's true. Although I've heard from many founders the learning that, not although, to add on to that, that when you can start paying yourself, for sure pay yourself. That because investors want you to also, if you can sustain yourself, then you're not gonna sustain a business, right? So yeah.
No, that hopefully you don't take away me saying that, like, don't pay yourself.
No, I know. It was an addition to
Right.
that, yeah.
But a lot of people obviously artificially deflate their salaries because they're using those same dollars to hire a team. So that's usually what we see. And then, post the Series A round, you sort of have to get people up to a normalized level. And there's lots of compensation data out there. And, your VCs will have access to all these databases. And there's consultant information in terms of what those look like at various stages, whether you're seed A, B, and across different industries. But like in the beginning, pay yourself a fair wage. But, if you're somehow generating $500,000 to $1 million of revenue, and you're basically paying yourself $500,000 a year or something like that, if you can even manage to do that, it's just not a good look.
Yeah. There was a question earlier. I'm curious to see your thoughts on it around like cash outs for founders. I know there's a lot of founders here in the pre-seed seed, and it's probably not advised, but they're like, what do you, from an investor's perspective, like, you think cash outs are positive to negotiate, negative, like?
You mean it's like taking money out at the time you raise a seed?
Yeah, I think in the seed and pre-seed is probably very preemptive, but like,
No way.
it can also be later stage too.
No way at the A. Most won't do it at the B. So once again, it's perceived to be a misalignment. Like there's rare instances where, you've been building this business for 10 or 15 years. You've taken very little out of it. It finally got to an inflection point. It's working. Like maybe you can convince your investors and board to do that. But if you're raising your first or even second round of financing and you're like, I want to take money off the table, that is a surefire way for people to say no to you.
Makes sense. And yeah, it's pretty much what we've seen too.
You get that chance once you're, raising a $30-50 million round. And even then, like if you were to ask me, we don't like founders doing that.
Is there a point where you see like it's okay to do it, like a Series C, or?
Well, like I said, it usually happens in the later stages, but it also depends who your investors and the board are, and it depends whether the new investor is willing to have some of the money go towards secondary. And it's challenging, right? Because you've got a waterfall, and the misalignment that I'm talking about is kind of founders are taking money off the table. Why aren't the investors? And then you end up in a situation where, the company fails and the only people who've made money are the founders versus the investors. Like that's why people don't like to do it, because everyone's in it for the outcome. And if people are taking money off the table in the interim, then like you should basically make sure that everyone can take some money off the table in the interim, that's kind of the way that these things happen. If they do happen, it's rare that founders take money off the table themselves, but like I said, crazier things have happened. We don't like to do it.
1,000%. We have 5 minutes left of Alex's time, guys. So encourage you to ask the last remaining questions. Alex, is there like maybe a question that I haven't asked, or piece of information that you really want to make sure we get in here for these founders?
Don't be shy. See some people speaking, but I think they're on mute.
Yes, make sure you put yourself on, like take yourself off mute, or you could write it in the chat and I can read it out loud too.
All right, I guess I'll take a shot since no one's going. Hi,
Go for it,
Stefan.
Stefan.
Thank you. I had asked a question earlier in the chat, and I don't know if it got addressed because I had got off the Zoom. I got kind of bumped until I got back on here. But my question was when raising, I've noticed in venture a lot of the models are very, very similar. Where they have expectations on, well, you're a startup, you're a new company, you're in tech or SaaS, so you're raising X, Y, Z. We're doing our business model is a little bit more capital intensive. And if we're looking to raise a seed round on a venture that is pre-revenue, and we're looking at, let's say, a 10 to 15 million round, what would, because we need that to develop the product, and it's let's say it's media, technology, or real estate. In these spaces, I mean, I guess those are all different spaces, but let's say the media entertainment side of this, what would be some of your recommendations for raising a larger seed on a pre-revenue product like these spaces?
So I think it's really hard. And my advice to you would be to figure out if there's a way for you to kind of bifurcate the raise, which means that at the end of it, if you can raise tranche 1 of 5, for example, tranche 1 of 5 doesn't have to get you to revenue generation, but you just have to convince those investors that tranche 1 gets you to some proof of concept, at which point you're going to have some green shoots, and then you're going to be able to go into phase 2 and test it against the market. I think it's got to be more of a bifurcated story, because raising $15 million in a pre-revenue company, like, either implies one of two things, which is like you have a way to get that from one of the big Silicon Valley firms who are just believers. And usually that means you're a repeat founder who's made money before, and they would be willing to make that bet. If that's not it, like, you effectively need someone to lead you around with a $8 million to $10 million, 7 to 10, let's say, check. And that is just really, really hard to do in today's environment.
Understood. Yeah, no, my two co-founders, my two partners, I mean, they have done, collectively 9 startups, 5 exits, 3 acquisitions, and 2 IPOs, right? And so they come from the media space. They have a tremendous track record in the industry, 40 years of experience in media and entertainment. So we're confident in the team and the structure and our experience base as a collective. But again, I'm essentially the newest guy in this ecosystem.
Yeah. Well, listen, you can, I mean, sounds like they've got a network, right? So once again, crazier things have happened. It's just more a question then of, like, if you're going to raise $15 million, that implies that you're probably going to have to raise that, some $50+ million valuation, to say the least, for that math to work out. That's a pretty big bet for someone to make, right? So someone must really know your partners to be able to make that bet, or you're going to be able to sort of piece it together using $500,000, $1 million checks from all these individuals that they know, and maybe smaller firms. But once again, you don't want to have a $15 million note or safe outstanding, because that doesn't work for you either. So the play I'm sure you're probably going to run is go try and get a term sheet for 7 to 10, and then build out the rest of the syndicate. But if that fails, I think you should go back to kind of what I said earlier, which is figure out what pre-launch really means, and is there someone who's willing to fund half of it to get you to this inflection point, and then maybe they basically fund the second half if you achieve that, and you kind of inch your way there.
Makes sense. Thank you. Yeah.
Yes.
No, I mean, these guys are household names, so I think we're on the right track. Thank you, Alex.
Well, like I said, it just means that whatever valuation you're going to raise at, you're better go from 0 to something that makes sense.
Appreciate that.
Always great feedback. Everybody, like, help me do a little virtual round of applause for Alex. Thank you, Alex, so much for your time. The insights are always like very, very practical, very straight to the point. I think it keeps us humble too. So I appreciate you taking the time to share with us and other founders and always sharing your candid feedback. Everybody, this session is gonna be available recorded. I'm gonna keep everybody else for a couple minutes just to do a wrap up. Alex, feel free to jump off. I'll make sure to share with everybody a little bit more info about you afterwards and about Revolution, in case they're curious.
Thanks a lot, everyone. I really appreciate
Thank you,
it.
Alex.
Hopefully you found this helpful. Thank you.
Everybody, thank you for sticking it out. I know it's been a long morning. We're almost there. We're almost gonna get this lunch. I'm just gonna jump into my presentation just to wrap up this session. There's been a lot of takeaways, and I want to hear from everybody too. I'm just gonna share like a couple of the things that I heard a lot, and then we'd love for people to like jump in and or put in the chat like their one key takeaway from today's session. It helps everybody sort of summarize everything. It was a lot to download, right? One of the things that I heard a lot from both Jacob and Alex was that, you know, the investors are going to bet on the founder. Jacob said it many times, and Alex referred to it, that like you as a founder, your grit, your ability to like deliver is going to be really what investors are investing in, especially at the pre-seed early stages. They also talked about the partnership and how important it is to marry not only the asset class, so what you're raising, whether it's venture debt or debt, equity, a grant, with your company and what you're building. And understanding, I think this is like a very common misconception, but understand what you want to build and based on that, pair it with the right partner. Don't just raise money to raise money. Get somebody that's going to help you build, especially at this stage, right? Like you guys don't need money, you need help to build, essentially. Money is always nice, but and I would say those are my two biggest. Oh, and then the third one, pitch, and how you like portray how you pitch your company, not only having the pitch really well and how you portray yourself, but also like what you have in the pitch deck. I think Alex went a little bit deeper into that. Those would be the three top of mind. There was a lot that I was like beautiful, but I want to hear from you guys. What is like one key takeaway for those that want to volunteer that you guys had of today's session? Go for it, Leslie.
I'm a talker. Well, I think that one of the most important things was the concern about age. And that demystified the fact that age is not a factor in the purpose of getting funded. And the second thing that blew my mind, that it was really a very simple thing. You might not need to get funded, and it's okay. And then when Alex says this morning, you know, in my particular case, maybe I should start by, you know, getting an SBA loan, rather than getting into one of the phrases that I love the most: with VC money comes VC expectations. So it's like a marriage. So that was my main takeaway. Those things, my main takeaway. And then I wanted to ask you, I saw that since you're mentioning that we can also try pitch competitions and grants here in the chat, I saw that Endeavor has opened a pitch competition right now. Do you recommend us to register for that?
Yes. Oh my God, thank you. You're making my life easier.
Good,
yes,
good.
register for it. It's a really good opportunity to get initial funding at no equity cost. And it's in partnership with like a couple of organizations, not only Endeavor. So for sure apply. Somebody dropped the link in there. You also can find it everywhere in our social media. Encourage you to apply. And any other pitch competitions. They're a good way to sharpen your pitch, and they're a good way to like get money that doesn't have any strings attached.
Good. So there's no like minimum size of your company or something like that. You can be
I don't believe so. I know there's like a final 10 that they're gonna pick to like
Okay.
pitch, but there's a couple of rounds. So either way, I encourage you to apply.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Thank you, everybody.
Anybody else that wants to share a takeaway? Otherwise, I'll jump ahead. Awesome. I'm gonna put in the chat here too the Venture Deals book. This is the book that I mentioned that is like really good if you just are starting to learn the terminology about VC. It's helped me a lot, and it's like it's a very founder friendly view of how to raise money. I really like it. They have also in their website a lot of other like really good resources. Wait, sorry about this. Okay, what's coming up next here? We have the final reminders. We're gonna post the recording on YouTube, probably an edited version, since this was a more interactive session. If you didn't register and you just got the link, share your email with us in the chat. We're gonna reach out later. Tomorrow we have another boot camp, so it's gonna be day 4 of boot camp or day 5. I'm not sure at this point. But it's gonna be building teams and culture from day 1. Very important. I think like hiring and people is just as important in fundraising. People don't talk about it, but it's true. So sign up if you haven't, or share it with people if you haven't yet. And it's the previous like pitches that the bootcamps that we've done, they're also on our YouTube. Given that today we talked a lot about like owning your image and presenting yourself, the day 1, it's about public relations and public speaking. Encourage you to check that one out. It was really good, talking about like how you pitch yourself and the company. As Leslie mentioned, we have a pitch competition, so look it up, apply to this link, open, apply, encourage it. And thank you everybody so much for taking this morning to be with us, to be in the audience, to participate. Any feedback, feel free to let us know. But yeah, thank you so much for showing up for yourselves and being here.